So, Asher, Greg, what a special honor to be here to interview you guys in person. I think Asher and I recorded an episode for my Modern War Institute at West Point podcast, but we quickly figured out this is a topic that deserves a long form podcast. My editors don't let me do that. So thanks for joining me.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to get into urban or underground warfare 101. Explain how we define it, the challenges, everything. Really excited, and I know that I'm going to learn, despite how long I've looked at this. I thought we could go around since we're going to post this on all of our mediums. Quick bios. So I'm John Spencer, of course, chair of Urban Warfare Studies, the Modern War Institute at West Point. You know that. I've been a student, enthusiast of underground warfare as long as I have been urban warfare, because it's hard to disconnect the two. And usually in any war studies, teaching strategy at West Point, there's an underground component if you look hard enough, from ancient warfare, World War I, World War II, to today. And I know we're going to talk a lot about that. I've probably been, of course, I served for 25 years in the U.S. Army infantry. Had my own experiences actually in Iraq with bunker systems and things like that we were going into. And then academically, about a decade of studying, a lot of work in Israel, which I know we're going to get into, from way before October 7th, actually. People think I, for some reason, started studying anything on October 7th, but was doing a ton of conferences with IDC, Herzliya, visiting Yahalom's old base, new base, getting into Hezbollah tunnels in the north, Hamas tunnels in the south. So, of course, most people that have ever listened to my podcast know that I kind of geek out on this, and what better people to geek out with some other experts.
Yeah, it's going to be fun.
So, Asher, can you give us a bio, and we'll pass it to you, Greg, as well?
Yeah, so thank you, John. And as I told you, I've been a huge fan of your work before October 7th, so I think that's a source of pride. But, I think even in Israel, we weren't doing enough work of building a doctrine, and many times you were almost the one that was doing it from the outside, even though you were coming and learning from our own experience. So it's an honor to be here with you. I'm dual citizen, American and Israeli, born and raised in Israel. I served in the tunnel detection lab that worked with Yahalom, and basically my job was then in 2014-15, we realized we don't have enough methodologies to map out tunnels. So my job was to go to the civilian world, see utility mapping, see oil finding methodologies, and see how we implement them with teams on the field to detect tunnels. And during my service, we found over 20 tunnels crossing over from Gaza into Israel, and another 7 crossing over from Lebanon into Israel. Following that, I moved to the U.S. I was working there actually in education. I thought that would be my passion in life. And October 7th hit and came back. And, then so many things in October 7th that we were sure have changed. And a big part of it was Subterranean Warfare and realizing what a network and system they've created. And for the past almost 3 years already, I've been mostly in reserve, trying to map out all the tunnels, Gaza, Lebanon, other locations around the world, working a lot on how to destroy them. And through this experience, we founded together with my co-founders, Yadin Sofer and Gilad Adin, Traysar, and work Subterra Prime. And our goal is to give the West Subterra abilities, and we'll talk about this term soon. So to bring back Western technological supremacy and not let our adversaries take advantage of this terrain, to not let us win battles. And that's my mission and what I'm trying to do in life today.
Amazing. I saw the article on Ynet, I think, with one of the founders. And I saw Yadin's kind of almost TED Talk. That was really, really impressive. Kudos to you guys on that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm really excited to talk about your work and the potential of it. But Greg, nice to meet you. We haven't met before. He got a kind of a softball intro conversation, and you didn't.
All good. Well, yeah, pleasure to meet you, and thanks for having me on as well. Just a little bit about myself. I think, I might, I never thought of it this way, but it might be that everything I've done so far was just kind of leading to this moment and, joining Traysar. But, my background, career-wise was kind of revolved a lot around welding. That's kind of where I got into my career and trades. But learned a lot of different things along the way. I mean, heavily revolved around being hands-on with welding. But I took information from everybody that I worked for and learned from along the way, and started in structural steel, and then I did commercial diving, underwater welding, and I went all over the world doing that. Went to some 20 odd countries. So it was actually a good young to mid 20s experience seeing the world and doing that and working on a lot of things. But then went to SpaceX after that, and was with SpaceX 2012 to 2017, and became a lead welder there. Did a lot of things, ground support equipment, building lots of different stuff for SpaceX. And again, maybe more so than what I did was, who I got to work with and who I got to learn from, and, get a lot of experience from that. And then about 5 or so years into that, the Boring Company kicked off, and it just so happened they started right across the street from SpaceX, and just happened that, I had some relationships with some people that were involved early on there, and they were coming to me for help, and SpaceX was okay with that, so we were kind of helping and doing all this stuff. And then a few months into that, they kind of asked me, "Hey, do you want to come over here and like just help us, do this thing?" I was like, "Yeah." So I just kind of jumped at that opportunity at the time, and that was a great opportunity to kind of start some things from scratch over there. And again, so that kind of morphed into, a lot more learning and a lot more engineering and team building, and just kind of building things from scratch, which was really great. So, and then the opportunity from there was that we moved to Texas, and I was had a big part in that as well. And then, just last year, I kind of get a random phone call, so to speak, from, you can say a blast from the past. There were some connections there, but it kind of led me to this opportunity with Traysar. And I think, beyond just a work opportunity was kind of the mission that is driving them. And my experiences and skills and whatnot, that kind of needed to be there for them to want me. But then I think for me to want them, I think, a lot of things aligned with, the goals that you guys touched on a little bit already. And, the driving factor behind the need for what Traysar is doing. So I'm super, super excited to be a part of that, and, bring whatever I've learned and, experienced over my career to, hopefully take Traysar to where they want to be, and, definitely excited to be a part of that. So.
Okay, so I'm going to do a second round. As having learned that my 15-year-old son didn't know what SpaceX was, I had to explain to him. He asked me, like, "What is SpaceX?" After seeing some rockets, and we talked about catching the rockets and all that cool thing. So I'm gonna do another round, but with questions for in case our audience just doesn't know. So one, I'm a part of the international working group on subterranean warfare, and one of my partners would die that he's not here to ask you some really technical questions. He's the chief. Well, he was the chief geologist for the British Army. So when we started talking about subterranean, he was, when we went like into the Hezbollah tunnel in the north, they left open, he geeked out with his mining gear and like talking about the rock and how different it is if you drive to northern Israel and you're in southern Lebanon aspect versus the sediment of Gaza along the border, the clay and all of that. And one, suck it, Drew, that you're not here. So you said, and I know we talked about it on the podcast, but for our listeners on this one, what is Yahalom? When did it start? What's its mission?
So Yahalom is a very special unit because basically its mission and goal is to combine the world of engineering with elite combat skills. And basically it's bridging these gaps that a lot of military needs that require very high level of technology, very high level of expertise, really engineering level of knowledge and technological use. Just like you described a geologist who knows how to be, the sapper geologist.
That's right. Yeah.
Big fan as well. I'm sad you're not here. So it's that same type of methodology. So what Yahalom does is they combine both of that together. They take soldiers that show capabilities of being tier one fighters, but also knowledgeable, smart. And they go through first training set. They go through basic training, basic engineering, core training, but then more tier one level combat training. And when they finish that, then they go and they're divided into different capabilities. So it could be bomb squads, bomb demolition. It could be biological warfare, God forbid, just so that there's a preparedness there. Actually, the Canadians are the ones that really trained us on that. And we also have, and this is today one of the biggest sections within the unit, is the tunnel fighting unit. And their job is to take probably, I would say, over by now, if you put everything together, over 100 different types of technologies, from drones or anything of that to detection to mapping to maneuvering and above and beyond, and implement it in tunnel warfare in doing it. So important to say, I'm not a classic soldier in that unit, but I've done, most of the work I've done in trying to implement and bring into this unit tunnel mapping, tunnel detection capabilities has been through them. And many times, it would be taking some university professor with a crazy idea and figuring out with them how we're now going to be in the middle of the field and something that can't be seen and still be able to map out and detect the tunnel. So, for example, the tunnel up north, a lot of that was, being with Yahalom and some very funny and crazy stories of being able to find those tunnels over there and doing it. So that's the Yahalom unit.
Can't wait to get into how hard it is to find and the different types of radar, penetrating radar, things like that.
Yeah.
The one thing you said is that an operator versus the scientific realm. So one, as somebody again who studied this for a little while, most militaries discount the subterranean. It's episodic, and they treat it as an extension of the surface, which we'll talk about. But as far as I know, outside of the special operations community that have a hard target defeat, like that deep buried targets, are really a category 4, a military target, which they specialize in. There's no army in the world who has committed resources for a long period of time. I mean, the U.S. Army, I think I sent it to you, a training video of course, we had a lot of experience with tunnels in Vietnam. There's about 1,000 miles of different variations of tunnels. Of course, the tunnels of Cu Chi, we're going to talk about some of that history. But it was episodic. There was a school in Leonard that closed it. Yahalom, and why I kept returning to Israel, is the only army who has committed over a brigade, special forces engineering unit, and one, just for expertise, which we'll talk about. That's one of the gaps in all militaries of the world is expertise. And usually when somebody wants to do something, then they outsource, like they did in World War I. They grab all those coal miners to start digging and try to get the civilian network to give them the expertise. But you mentioned about technology, and what I've been impressed, one, of course, is the commitment of a brigade side formation for a very long time. So you have expertise just in operators, but also in the technical aspects of what are the needs that we're going to get into, and the R&D, which I think is vital. And I'm excited to hear about some of the research and development that you guys have been doing. But that's not normal for us in the U.S. military or other militaries to have that capability inherent in the unit, an R&D capability. Some special units have it, but that really keyed to me. Okay, Greg, big question. What is SpaceX? And then we'll go to the boring company.
I was like a blip on the SpaceX map for sure. And, obviously I think most people know what SpaceX is now. When I started in 2012 and told people that I worked there, it was still at the point where most people were like, who, where, what? I think, ULA still had a monopoly on the market at the time, and SpaceX was, yet to take hold of that. But, obviously SpaceX is doing some big things, as everybody knows and sees. I haven't been very involved in that in a while. Again, I left there in 2017. But, I'm probably not the right one to say what is SpaceX, but I can continue on that. But obviously.
Sure. I point people to Elon's biography, whether he loves it or not.
Yeah.
It details the why when President Obama basically kind of closed NASA and commercialized it.
Yeah.
And then Elon gets into rocket development. And the story's in that book, but here's the answer I told my son, is that it's basically NASA commercialized and has figured out how to do space, get into space at a much cheaper and efficient way, but they make rockets and they're in the space exploration. Of course, Elon has greater aspirations in space, and he's actually changed those. But I just say it's like NASA for
Yeah.
commercial.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that was always the goal. I mean, there's certain things that have to be done along the way in order to get to the bigger goal, which there's still some of those things happening now, but I think now it's a lot closer to like him getting to do the things that he really wants to do, right? Because early on, obviously, there's a lot of missions that are like, oh, you do this to make some money because you need to, or you need to prove out the technology, which was a big part of it. And obviously, I think early on, just getting that tech reliable was a huge part of that, which obviously they've become one of the most reliable, rocket companies in history, if not, already for sure. But
And that's what really when we talk about Traysar as a company that started up. I mean, again, I've heard Elon doesn't like it, but it's a great information piece about the development of all the different companies, from PayPal to SpaceX to Tesla, and what were the challenges and how many rockets failed in SpaceX, and it was on the verge of collapse. And actually, literally, a Tesla was driving in front of me when I'm having this conversation with my son. Boring Company, though, I think less people would recognize that name. I, of course, know it. One, for Elon's famous quote while he was a part of it, saying that really we can dig at the pace of a snail. And that quote stuck with me, and I use it all the time.
Yeah.
Although it's I'm sure that's talking about the big dig versus a Hamas guy with a hand tool being able to dig tunnels every day for 20 years. So what is the Boring Company?
Yeah. Well, and actually, on that note, I think the goal is to still catch a snail. Like, so in theory, I don't think we can go as fast as a snail. And I think it's not at any given moment, but if you took the average speed of a snail, if you can continue that speed continuously, like you'd be digging miles a day, sort of thing, right? But so that's still a challenge, I think, chasing the snail. But the Boring Company is, I think as maybe not everybody knows, but started as kind of like a seemingly joke from Elon. Being from California, I'm very familiar with the soul-destroying traffic of like the 405 freeway or whatever freeway in Southern California, you name it. But yeah, I think I think he famously tweeted like, oh, I'm going to start digging tunnels or whatever, and then sure enough, they buy a boring machine and start digging tunnels. So. But yeah, I mean, the goal of the Boring Company is to, alleviate traffic, create new transportation systems that kind of have gone untouched, along the lines of, similar of what we're trying to do is like, touch an area that is, more or less untouched. But for Boring, I think it's alleviating traffic and, trying to make transportation better, easier, all sorts of things that are, good in nature. So, and I don't think it didn't start with any technological advancement. It started with an existing technology that they wanted to get better at and push the limits of, which it's a similar mindset that we're going to have at Traysar. We're not trying to reinvent a wheel, especially on the onset. We're going to take things that exist and push them and break them and, try to make them better and maybe use them in areas that are not currently used, but yeah, so I guess that's that's that.
I love and now we're gonna shift into the actual topic of underground warfare, but I love the big, hairy, audacious goal that often comes out of some of Elon's work, like those, or reinventing electric vehicles and the battery and all these challenges. It makes me almost think of a Philadelphia project. If you have that land on the moon kind of ideal. And I think in the sub-T, as we're going to talk about, I think it's convincing people that there is a challenge to be solved. Not a problem, but there's actually a cognitive that's almost for people, and hopefully we'll talk about the challenges. But Asher, I want to go back to you. One, I'll start with the indirect question of how do you I know you created a term that I'm probably going to be using a lot, and I'll try to trademark it for you, like where it came from. But as somebody who's dealt with this space to include help write the U.S. military doctrine on underground warfare, subterranean, a lot of people use the words interchangeably. Do you use underground warfare, subterranean warfare, tunnel warfare, and sub-T interchangeably, but I know you have a new word to try to help us understand the actual magnitude of it.
Yeah.
Do you use all the words interchangeably?
So I do, and you know, it wasn't me, but it was someone that we were working with that pointed out this problem, and he was just reflecting to me that, you know, and he was reflecting this to me for a while, that so many things that for me were obvious are not obvious to the, you know, even people in the military who aren't in this area. But I'll kind of skip to the end. Is, you know, we're trying to bring this term called Subterra. And no need for credit as long as people are using it. But the reason this term we're so insisted on it and we believe it's so important is because our big belief is that Subterra, and the definition of Subterra is that anything that has to do with warfare underground is a realm of warfare in itself, and it's not a tactical side element of a battle. And this is kind of where, you know, to go back to your question, is today when we talk about aerial warfare, when someone says, "Oh, I'm working on aerial warfare," no one is asking him, "Wait, are you attacking planes? Are you shooting missiles from planes? Are you delivering logistics? Are you delivering troops?" It's very obvious to people that there's a whole domain that has a whole set of capabilities and advantages that it gives militaries by using this domain that change the way warfare is fought. And this is where we really believe that Subterra is taking us. Subterra isn't just about tunnel warfare, maneuvering within a tunnel. It's not just about penetration and trying to hit an enemy tunnel. It's about how do we protect ourselves underground? How do we maneuver underground? How do we do, and especially in today's world where we're seeing what's happening in aerial warfare, this domain is going to become a whole set of skills that I do believe, and if Traysar sticks to their mission and we work hard, that at the end of the day, when someone says Subterra warfare, it's obvious to people that this means a whole set of capabilities that militaries have, both to prevent our adversaries of using this domain to their strategic advantage, which is what's been happening until today, and we'll talk about it, but also how our militaries are using this to protect our critical infrastructure and our troops to do it. And that's kind of the overall domain name that we're trying to bring, so that 10 years from today, you'll be hearing people say air, land, sea, space, and Subterra.
So you've already convinced me that we misnamed the podcast. So Underground Warfare 101 maybe should be Subterra 101. Because even if I give a lecture on tunnel warfare, you cognitively already put somebody at what they know, what they can think of, culture, popular culture, what they've heard of. I mean, the tunnels of Kuchi is like the number one thing you'll get from like a military person, but I think that's one of the beauties of it too, because I mean, words have meaning. So subterranean just takes too long to say, and then somebody's like, "What is that?" I think you could actually break ground, and I've been around for a long time, and nobody else has tried to do that. Break the cognitive hurdles that we're going to talk about by renaming it, and it, whether it's the whole book like tipping point or sticking, if it sticks. By just naming this podcast Underground Warfare 101, I think I did it to you again.
Now we're evolving.
That's
we're
right.
all evolving.
We're going to evolve.
just like our militaries.
So how do you define, and I know I saw, again, the Traysar launch kind of TED Talk thing was really cool. How do you define Subterra?
So I think I'll start by just almost describing the journey of, my personal journey within this, and I think that will also define the domain. Mostly during October 7th, the main thing that I really felt, and going on into battles in Lebanon and afterwards dealing with Iran, and till today I feel it, all the time, is that we have this unbelievable technological supremacy, air, land, and sea. And we have overwhelmingly force in those areas. I've personally experienced many times where, a lot of times, I might have some IDF soldiers that'll be mad at me, but a lot of times when people imagine IDF soldiers fighting in Gaza, they're imagining door to door. But most of the time when we would have any sort of threat, coming our way, we would just hide behind somewhere and let the Air Force or one of our drones take care of it and take out the threat. So probably most of the times I've been in Gaza, I've never shot my gun once. And that was amazing. But on the other hand, it was very, very noticeable that although we have this overwhelming strength, the investment of our adversaries in Subterra at a very, very low-tech, nothing impressive technological breakthrough, just, day to day, and we'll talk about this, the time element and how it affects wars, didn't enable us to have any sort of decisive win. Until today, we're still dealing with this problem in Gaza. And we see it also today in Iran, where I think people underestimate and don't understand how much the Subterra strategy is directly connected to the Hormuz strategy, because it's a timing element. And the U.S. is paying huge prices of Strait of Hormuz close, and thereby Iran just has to survive underground enough time for the U.S. to break and say, well, this is costing us too much. And both of these are interconnected. So the journey really started of feeling this frustration at, on one hand, feeling the might of our military, and on the other hand, our inability to win and have a decisive battle. But the more, we kind of dove into this and really went into it, what we realized is that we're missing the greatest part of it, is that if our adversaries are using this domain and it's giving them such a strategic advantage, and in a world where, especially when you see Ukraine and Russia and you see how suddenly military might and economic might is not giving decisive battle abilities because of the aerial domain, and that we're entering an era, and again, we could talk about this more and more, but we're entering an era of an arms race where the technology is pretty much equivalent one to another, that this is also the domain, the best domain in which we could start protecting our troops and changing the way we fight fights so that we won't be at a huge disadvantage in the next major battles that we'll be facing and that we're preparing for. Hopefully that will never happen. I'm not hoping for it to happen, but that we have to be prepared for and ready for. So to go back to the question, I think the domain of Subterra is the maneuver underground. It's the ability to feel comfortable in using technology to move and position yourself underground. And I'll give you even a small example. A lot of times one of the big questions that I think in a lot of tier one, and I won't go too much into detail of this, but the obvious one is that there's blast doors in a lot of the strategic infrastructure. Even the operation that was advertised of the Israeli unit Shaldag that went into in Syria into a huge weapon manufacturing.
I wrote about that. Yeah.
There's a very big question of these blast doors. It's I won't go into the technical specificalities, but it's basically a lot of steel and then a lot of cement and then rebar in the middle and then more cement and more steel. And Greg, you as a welder could know how challenging that could be to do that in an underground tunnel. And everyone were trying to come up with different solutions to do that. And one of the things that I'm still passionate about, maybe I'm hinting here to one of our products, but it was like, why don't we maybe just dig underneath the blast door and, pop up from the other side? So I think that this is what Subterra is. It's the moment militaries have a mentality, have a doctrine, have the technology that makes them feel comfortable in this type of maneuver and usage underground, just like you would fly over something if it was an obstacle and not, in fact, have to go completely through it. That's what Subterra is. It's the domain of moving in the. And I think Palmer Luckey, as much as he made it sound scientifically, he made a huge contribution in willing to speak in these terms to say, yes, we're going to maneuver in the crust of the earth. We're going to move things in the crust of the earth, and that's what this domain is.
Yeah, and I want to get to Palmer's statement. Interesting about the going underneath the blast doors. Again, as the geeking out on this, I mean, again, our good friend on X, sapper geologist, the term sapper comes from the era of attacking castles and the sappers trying to dig underneath the fortifications. Or actually what they would do is dig up to it and then try to get it to and set fires underneath the wall and have it collapse down to create the opening for the forlorn hope to surge through that. And again, I'm having kind of revelations as I love the term subdomain or Subterra domain, because Subterra is one thing, but the fact that you want to make it a domain as much so as air, sea, land, space, cyber, Subterra, because having, again, a knowledge of where militaries can find themselves with the words, if you open up like the U.S. military's public subterranean operations doctrine, it will define subterranean in categories. It starts with naturally formed crevices, caves, things like that, and then it goes up to kind of there are different variations of civil underground infrastructure, like the boring companies and tunnels, highways, rivers, things like that, and then of course that high category of military. But it doesn't really lend itself that we're talking about anything below anything below the surface of the earth, whether it's 1 foot or how far?
Thousands of feet.
Yeah, thousands of feet,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And I think that is when you take Subterra domain is you open up the field, right? I'm not going to constrain myself to these categories because, and as you were talking of the examples, which I want to do around the world, of what are the examples of Subterra. If we want to, and this is why I love a long form podcast, what I can't do on my show, is like, well, we're going to go that way. We're going to go over to history. Oh, we're going to go this way. We're going to go around the world. And I'll pose this to you. We can start with you and going around the world. And Greg, please. There's always been an aspect of put what you want to protect underground. Again, going back to the subterranean operations, we're going to start calling it Subterra domain. It's a thing. If you value something, whether it's your strategic nuclear command, I live somewhere really close to where we put some stuff in the mountain to survive nuclear destruction. That's as old as warfare is, as much so as fighting underground, but especially today. If you're a military, a state, a terrorist, whatever, if you want to protect something, then you know you need to put it underground. And you talked about, though, which I was just at a conference discussing, is that's present. And when we do it around the world, we'll talk about just the scale of the Subterra around the world that nobody really discusses, and the fact that we don't have a unit in the U.S. military, we don't have companies. Good on you. Let's patents and all that. We're going to seal it. Is almost ridiculous, to be frank. There are specialists, and I would love to talk to Greg about this. Actually, my friend Joe Vega, like there are even countries who specialize in digging, like the Netherlands or something. Like he said, if you see some people traveling from the Netherlands, be word. And of course, some of our enemies, North Korea, helping Hezbollah dig tunnels, things like that. They build expertise. I would wonder within our military who are our experts, and of course we have our civilians, putting things underground to protect it, not new. I think what you described about our enemies doing it is they've figured out the Western way of warfare, and there's a big conference I was at. They reversed engineer it, saying usually they want to finish their thing quickly. So whether I'm Hamas, which was trying to buy time for the international community to stop Israel, even at the one superpower of the world, some of our enemies have figured out if I can just survive 80, 90 days, then there's going to be issues within the democracy of the people, depending on what the context of the war is. I think that aspect, from what I'm hearing, is one of the reasons that energized you about, of course, working in the Subterra domain, is that the enemy is not only investing in it, but they're using it at a strategy level. And I wrote this for Hamas's political strategies. One of the first wars that I've studied where the enemy cares more about the Subterra than he does the surface. Of course, they built that, but as a strategy and defined in war as to achieve my political goals, the Subterra matters to me more than the surface, because our enemies, of course, that's Israel's enemy, has figured out how long it takes before things start to change in the strategic environment. Well, now we're seeing Iran, and we can talk about some other places who have figured out the same. It's not only to protect their things, but it's about buying time in war. If we do it around the world, where do you want to start?
I mean, maybe we start with Iran because it's most immediate, and then we'll go on a long journey around the world in less than 80 seconds. No, I don't.
No,
I'm
no, we're in
joking.
long form.
Yeah.
We don't have to.
Less than 80 days. But yeah, I think I think the important element with I'll start with Iran because I think I'll even take it one step back. Is what people have to realize is that the Subterra complexes that Iran built, and we're talking about not one, not two, because a lot of times people like to talk about Fordow and Shiraz and places that there's the real strategic nuclear abilities over there, or whatever is buried under the earth that everyone are talking about. People have to realize is that this is a brilliant strategy of Iran, and I'll start with a tweet that I love giving of Trump himself in 2020. He said, Iran never won a military battle and never lost a negotiation. Now, Iran people don't know this. Chess was invented in Persia. Like they're amazing strategists, and they know that they're not going to win a military battle against Israel. They know that they're not going to win a military battle for sure against the U.S. But what they do know is they understand, I think, the psychology of Western civilization, just as you said, better than we understand our own psychology. And they know from the get-go how this is going to play out and how this is going to work. And I think one of the examples of that really emphasizes to me so well is that at the beginning of the wave of attack that the U.S. and Israel were carrying together, because we didn't have the ability to really penetrate inside their Subterra complexes, and I'll soon explain why, we were bombing a lot of the entrances to all these different places. But then we saw something kind of surprising. We saw that they were purposely collapsing their own entrances to their own things. So you ask yourself, well, why were they purposely filling up with dirt and excavation machines these complexes? Another thing that we were seeing, if you look at aerial maps, you'll see that a lot of the structures that were strategic to them, they just put on the sidelines a huge amount of engineering machines, excavators, pickup trucks, things like that. But that was brilliant of them, because basically what they knew that was going to happen is if those structures were open, there would be a few entrances that probably we would think of sending tier 1 troops to come in and try to raid and try to take out, and with very high capabilities, and probably would be able to do it. But the moment they purposely just filled it up with dirt, and again, you could see here where we're struggling, you just have to fill something up with dirt. You don't even have to dig it underground. And suddenly that changes how a tier 1 unit could even think of approaching and coming in. Suddenly it's not a blast door, but it's tons and tons of earth just waiting there. And the day after the peace deal, their trucks are already sitting there idle, 10-minute drive away, and could just start clearing out that dirt. And within a few days, they could have access again to the structures of where they're trying to go. So that's number one. Number two is the way they built these structures. You could say, well, maybe we bombed all the entrances. There wasn't any air. There wasn't any food access. Well, they built these complexes in ways where there was many different access points. It was very hard to know if we knew of all of them. And it was enough that we missed one entrance or one airway, and they could continue to have life support in getting where they want to go. Number three, and I think, unfortunately, we know, like, there's been all kinds of intel open source. I'm not saying anything that isn't open source, that some of our bunker busters didn't go off and they're already reverse engineering them and understanding. And this, by the way, also what happened in Gaza in 21, we could talk about that, is they studied these bunker buster munition. They understand how they work. And there's a whole world of civilian engineering put into this. It's not just about digging deep enough. There's concrete infrastructure that's being built around it at a certain pressure that's even, much higher than hard rock. If you understand how these bunker busters work, right, they're penetrating until they sense some sort of, airway or some sort of passageway that they know how to. And again, I'm not an expert at bunker busting, but this is more or less what the open knowledge tells us. So if you build certain air passageways before your concrete infrastructure, maybe you're detonating this ahead of time. These aren't small infrastructures. Some of them are miles long, that even if you know where they are and you know where the entrances is, where is exactly where you're trying to strike? Where is where you're trying to hit? There's blast doors that are blocking the blast. So you blasted one area and it collapsed. Well, maybe none of it even penetrated through to the area that's actually strategic to them. And then if you add the time element to it, the civilian underground infrastructure is something that existed for hundreds of years. So the game is brilliant because they're giving us very short windows to do the effect that we want to do. And then they have extremely long windows to rehabilitate, regrow during the peace deal when we feel there's no justification politically to go in again and try to block them from doing what we're doing. So I think Iran are the masters in many ways, and I'm sure they learned this from North Korea and China, of Subterra strategy, because it's not just, we moved it underground, as you said. There's a much deeper process and strategic process going on of saying, how do we block the adversary from even thinking of trying to come in and take what's strategic to them? How do we make it extremely expensive and difficult to ever really hit our strategic assets? And then all we need to do is survive long enough to, as you say, to pinpoint that Western, civilian resilience to a point, because it's all interconnected, so that it breaks. And the moment it breaks, there's a peace deal. And the moment there's a peace deal, we have unlimited time to do stuff that in no way look, militarily aggressive, right? We just have excavators. We just have trucks. These aren't tanks. These aren't planes. But these are the ones that are bringing back that whole capability yet again, and the access points to these capabilities. And then you end up in, day one, where also our politicians have zero justification to go into war. Like, could you imagine Trump saying, well, the Iranians are, redigging with excavators the underground complex. I'm going to fight back in Iran. If people don't understand what that means, that there's an excavator and a truck in Shiraz, and that deliberately has to do with access to nuclear capabilities, people won't be giving the justification to these types of fights. So I think this is all, in many ways what's happening in Iran and what we'll see in other areas.
So, absolutely. It's so hard to do this shortly, right? To take all the areas. So quickly for me, I'll go to China because for us, U.S. military, we start with China.
Yeah.
And kind of work our way down, right? China, of course, has thousands of miles of military and civilian underground on purpose for survivability, things like that. They call it they have the Great Wall of China. They call it the Great Underground Wall of China. It's thousands of miles. Of course, Iran, most people now, Bordeaux, Natanz, Isfahan, Pickaxe Mountain, missile cities. I have actually never heard of an estimate, but they've been investing in it a long time. And this is the evolution of warfare is when anybody's engaged in a war, everybody's watching. We're watching what capabilities work, what capabilities don't work. So if you look at even our first Gulf War, the great 83-day victory, and the bunker busters we were using at the time, a lot of people were watching and seeing how those were effective. And the GBU 57 that was used against for Operation Midnight Hammer was designed specifically for that site. It's not like they didn't know, and the precision it takes that you get to a depth where, and you said, you're right, it's not just the depth, it's the engineering, it's the blast wave. Open source, of course, I know, like you said, I'll go back to going down the hierarchy of countries, but you mentioned about what Hamas learned from Operation Guardian of the Walls 2021. I was there on the ground right afterwards, and after October 7th, they found the memo where Yahya Sinwar authorized the $250,000 to put in more blast doors, which is about stopping that concussion, because during Operation Guardian of the Walls, you dropped some bunker busters and it followed the path of the tunnel and knocked down I think it was a school or something. That it's just because of how Swiss cheese underneath Gaza, these tunnels, and so he started in placing more blast doors. Okay, China, Great Underground Wall of China. Iran, of course, we know, like I said, and of course there are missile cities and all these things. There's stuff along the ports. All of this, like you said, they've learned. North Korea. So the reason that the U.S. military cared about underground warfare, if we call it at the time, for a little while, because somebody looked at our plans for a course of action if North Korea happened. North Korea, of course, has hundreds of miles of deep buried military sole-purposed spaces, and some of the people look at the war plan saying that there are so many that you don't have enough special teams. Of course, you don't have enough Yahalom, which becomes a scale capacity of people specialized in this Subterra domain. It's not, if you name it and classify it, kind of like we did Space Command, you recognize that it isn't this special thing for people. It's an entire domain that you have to prepare to operate in, and we're going to talk about what those challenges are. But in about 2018 in North Korea, we realized the U.S. military didn't have enough capabilities, so we went around training all of our brigades in basically how to enter a tunnel and how to clear a tunnel, with a little bit of breaching capabilities in there. We spent almost $500 million to do it, and then we wrote the manual that we have now, and as you can see, it hasn't been updated since. North Korea, so we're going to go to Russia, Ukraine. So where are we seeing it? You mentioned it, but I'll highlight, of course, everybody says like in Ukraine, but most people talk about the drones and the dead man zone that goes from 15 to 50 kilometers where you can't operate on the surface or you're a threat. Or they're starting to do operations where they literally send one guy at a time out to go into the city, and that's how they try to form a formation, by sending one person at a time into an area, because the surface is so lethal with all the range of drones and robotics. What an article that I've been writing on, and maybe we talk about doing it together, is the underground world that is in that dead man zone. So everybody talks about that's a dead man zone. Both sides have invested heavily in the last 2 years in creating underground spaces. Not just, and we talked about this, which I think is a great example. I was on the ground when Ukraine was starting to dig trenches and working with some people and, okay, let's collect what's out there on trenches. No military had any doctrine left over on how to dig a trench, like a true trench. Of course, we all know how to dig a foxhole, but like a trench line with the elbows, and why do you have those elbows? And if you take a trench and you cover it, does it become a tunnel? But of course, that was a long time ago. But it's an example of we don't have all the lessons that we learned, the U.S. military, like in Vietnam with it, they're gone. They're just gone. So the trench warfare, how to dig a trench was gone, and all the specialty of that. Because I know a little bit enough, though, if you dig a hole and you put stuff on top of it, that's not endless. If you put more and more burden on top of it, then you're going to start compressing, the blowouts. Actually, I bought some land in Colorado because I wanted to dig, and like, what does it take to brace? And I couldn't dig because it was all rock, but I wanted to bore. That in Russia and Ukraine, they are hiring both sides. Construction companies. At first, it was just excavators, and they were excavating to create trenches, but then they were creating underground spaces, and they started hiring it's a existential war for Ukraine, so they started using construction companies to create underground hospitals, underground drone manufacturing plants, connecting roads underground, just completely going. Because of that lethality of the surface, I know we're going to talk about that later, going underground. Russia's the same thing. Russia has highways underground. Of course, there have been a couple battles. Of course, the Battle of Kiev that I've studied, Battle of Bakhmut, and all those that had naturally formed already spaces. But I think that aspect of what's going on in Russia, Ukraine is underappreciated. You mentioned Syria. Of course, I wrote about the amazing historic operation that Israel did to fly Israeli special forces, because no bunker buster could have gotten it done. Fly them to one deep, actually it's called Operation Deep Buried, or it had like a deep buried target name. Flew special forces to enter it, blow it up from inside, and use forklifts that they knew were there for some of it. It was a really cool operation. But in Syria, most people didn't know until since October 7th, that there are these massive tunnel highways to be able to feed Hezbollah its rocket supplies. They found massive ones, and they've actually found them on the east side of Syria. They found these massive tunnels as really around once ISIS and all this stuff, really in the Middle East, all those that weren't already invested in tunnels started to go deep into, even in the Battle of Mosul, they found boring machines, little personal boring machines that for 2 years, ISIS tried to create subterranean spaces, and they would fill all the houses with dirt to hide the spoil, which goes back to how do you know somebody's digging a tunnel.
Yep.
Hopefully that's enough of around the world. Of course, Vietnam.
Mexican border,
absolutely. Most of the time, those don't get reported. I did an article about how many have been reported. And when you talk about really cross-border, which is actually was Israel's, so that's an evolution I don't want to get into, of Israel's specialty in tunnels and what it cared about tunnels. For a long time, it was just that cross-border tunnel that they cared about. And once they built the iron wall that most people don't know about, once they built the wall between Gaza and Israel that had a subterranean component with sensors all the way down to the water table, then it causes people to not get complacent, but they've kind of solved the cross-border aspect once they developed that technology. And I wrote that there are places in the southern border we need it, because as you have more and more visibility to see the surface, enemies go. But you're right, this is not just about combating enemies. Even during the Gaza war, which I wrote about, Israel changed its culture towards the Subterra domain in the Battle of Khan Yunis and started going into the tunnels to maneuver into the tunnels before Hamas knew you were there, and then maneuver on the surface at the same time. So the first time in modern history anybody's ever used on the attack the Subterra domain and the surface at the same time to do that. Okay, hopefully that's enough for people, although we could go into each one of those.
Yeah.
Areas of the world. It just to put it lightly, it's pervasive. And I could talk about just some of the underground sites we have here, because if we care about things, we put it underground. But it's just pervasive, and let alone in the civil industry. I just got back from India. Massive historic level tunneling through mountains to connect great vast pieces of land that never been connected before. It's pervasive, and the fact that the militaries aren't focused on it. But let's get to even a funner topic, of what are the challenges of operating in the Subterra domain.
So yeah, so I think that the what people mostly miss in Subterra warfare, and this is also what always worries me when we're training troops to fight, is doing the mistake of seeing this as if it's is a regular urban warfare challenge, a maneuvering within a building or something like that. And we spoke about this also, but I think it's so much to understand that the domain and the terrain itself, that's your biggest enemy, your biggest threat, more than the enemy himself. And Hamas were actually masters of that, of sometimes almost scaring us so much of what would happen in that tunnel that we are risking ourselves more by how we were maneuvering through it. So I'll start just with, like I'll go from like the psychology to the methodologies in general. So first of all, the moment you're going into a tunnel, you're in complete tunnel vision. It's hard. A lot of these tunnels do these very light turns, and it's hard to even understand where you are at a certain point. Now, what that causes a few things. Number one is sometimes you could enter a tunnel, and this has happened to me, where you enter a tunnel and you end up in a loop, meaning you're almost where you started, and you see someone in front of you that you think this is the terrorist I've been looking for, and it's actually your friend who's maneuvering right behind you, and you were sure the whole time that you were going completely straight. Now, the next thing is when you're about to go into a building, even if you don't have the blueprints of the building, you know more or less the size of the building. You know that if you're on the flank right, there's very likely there isn't going to be a trapdoor going in. But if you're maneuvering through a tunnel, you never know where the next access point and where the next entry is going to be. So and you were talking about Khan Yunis. In Khan Yunis, there were instances where literally soldiers were drilling a hole in every side of a tunnel as they were moving forward to make sure that there wasn't some sort of trapdoor that was about to go in. So you could maneuver very deep inside, and someone could just go from the side. Someone could implement an explosive from above that collapses the tunnel behind you. So there's that. Then you have the communication. The moment you take a few 90-degree turns in a tunnel, and for example, Hamas realized this and purposely created many, many 90-degree turns in a tunnel, you're completely losing communication unless you're in a mesh system. And relying on a mesh system means that the moment, one is cut off, you're completely cut off and you don't know how to communicate, how to locate, know where you are. If you're in command and control back, you don't know where your soldier is to rescue. Now we're entering the terrain itself. So first of all, there's the air. If you're even shooting a few bullets in a very small confined tunnel, you're already in loss of air. If an explosion goes off, a lot of times it sends on gases. A lot of the bunker busting munitions that we were using in Gaza, it wasn't the explosion itself that was a threat, but a lot of times it would just, there were so many elements that were now in the air that people, were dying from suction of air, lack of oxygen, et cetera. So it's so dangerous to use any sort of violent act within a tunnel, because the moment you're doing it, you're risking yourself more than many times. Especially if you don't know what's in front of you, you don't just want to shoot, or you don't just want to bomb, because then, you're damaging yourself many times more than anything else. Then there's, just the structural integrity of the whole tunnel. So anything you're doing, you're at a risk of actually collapsing it on yourself. There are many instances where you don't want to go in to fight the adversary, not because he's stronger than you, but because by you having to use violence in order to get to him, you're actually threatening yourself of something collapsing over you. Not to talk about how do you rescue someone out of a tunnel structure. It's not like, again, in a building where you could just blast a hole in a wall and someone could, zip line you down, or a helicopter or any sort of thing like that. But how do you dig access without hurting someone when you're trying to get to where you're trying to get? So that's a whole other element in itself. So basically, and then there's the blast. So if a blast goes off, it's going to go through the easiest way. So it's going to clear through the tunnel. So any sort of blast that goes in a tunnel is actually much more threatening than a smaller blast. So you have to think very well what sort of explosive you're using. If you're at a blast door and you want to now blow up the blast door, so number one, are you creating a blast that could implement you way back? What's happening to the air the moment you blow through that blast door? What's happening to the structural integrity above you? Do you even want to blow through a blast door if you're doing it? So, as I, defined it, is you're fighting the terrain more than you're fighting the adversary in underground warfare. And that's why, and this is, again, one of the missions that I see for our company is, and this is the example of the blast door as well, is sometimes it's so much smarter to dig your own tunnel to where you need to get to face your adversary, rather than maneuver through the adversary's domain, because he's going to be in way more control of what you're doing, and that's a part of it.
So much to talk about.
Yeah.
But also, I really want to get into why I was so fascinated with the 98th Division and Khan Yunus that he actually put a mission. So General Goldfuss, not that he's the only one I ever thought about, but gave the IDF a mission. Like, I want to be able to use that space underground. I know it's there to my advantage. I want to so he changed the mental framework. But so a couple of things you've said in our last podcast and you just said, but I think these mental models really help people. One is that as soon as you enter the underground, you're in a war with the environment, or as soon as you enter the underground, you're in a fight with the environment, even before you're in a fight with the enemy, and it's much more important. I think that's important. This is the analogy that I've given people, is that a lot of soldiers, anybody you talk to, especially if it's outside of civil engineering, which we'll talk about, even coal miners, they get some of the challenges because it's a profession, and they mitigate for it, but it's still a highly dangerous work, is that it is not an extension of the surface. So that gets a lot of people in trouble when they think, even a basement in a house or a tunnel that is not that deep, they just view it as an extension of the surface. And the analogy that I've been within our international working group for Subterranean Warfare is that it's the mental model of, against the sea domain. Nobody treats the surface of the ocean the same way they do as soon as you go underwater, because it's completely different. And everything you need to even think about once you go underwater, talk about deep sea or submarine warfare, everybody respects it as it's its own profession, its own domain, it's everything. That's where I think that the Subterra domain is. It is not an extension of the surface. It is analogous to surface warfare, which is actually a name for the Navy guys, all the ships on the surface and all that involves, very complex and navigating and stuff. We don't like the Navy because we're Army. But if you go underwater, then it's a whole different. So of those two categories that I try to put people, one is if you could write a book and just spend so much time talking about the challenges. One is, as soon as you stick a human into the underground, there's a whole list of challenges, right? I actually wrote a book recently, and one of the titles is called "A Canary in Their Coal Mine," which we get from the coal miners taking a canary with them into the coal mine, because the air is so dangerous, is that if the canary dies, you have a clock, you got to get out of there because you're about to die, because that's how fast the air can go bad. But I know enough, again, from talking to people who like special forces guys, confined spaces training. So how quickly, and you don't even know until you stick a human underground whether they can even do it, is that they get claustrophobic, they can get vertigo, lose all sense of direction and time quickly. It isn't like there's a clock, like, hey, you can stick any soldier down there for a certain amount of time and they're good until this mark. No, you can stick one guy based on their background and they immediately freak out. And my friend Joe Vega is like really big, like, linebacker dudes starting to freak out underground. So I think that element, of course, the air, like you mentioned, not especially if we're talking about truly sticking a human underground, at what depth, under what quality is the air, and then if you have to have a contained breathing apparatus, then that is a whole host of complications. Or as even I saw in the tunnels that I were in Hamas, they think through it, not that good at it, but they have ventilation and ventilation shafts as much as they did in Vietnam, and hoses and all of these things that, because I don't want to just think about entering the enemy's tunnels. I want you guys to start thinking about making tunnels rapidly that I can use to surprise the enemy and go underneath their fortress. Because Sun Tzu, like, I'm the professor, Sun Tzu, what Iran has done is attacked our strategy. The next strategy that Sun Tzu said was attack your allies. And then the next one is attack the military, fight the military. And lastly, attack the wall city. But he didn't have the ability to go under the city. within this human physiology aspect is also the contaminants that are down there. Um, as I know the IDF have learned, I mean, there are special types of contaminants depending on when that underground surface. I mean, there's like if we start going deep underground, there's stuff that and bacteria and things like that we aren't really as prepared for. And they had a soldier, I think the IDF got a cut, and there was like sewage under the underground,
Yeah.
and it was really like a flesh-eating bacteria. If my friend Drew would talk about the different types of sensors you would have to have for like air quality and contaminants and things like that. And then again, it's more like going scuba diving than it is. I'm just going to pop down there from the surface.
By the way, I could hint that some of the equipment we ended up using were stuff that were more Navy SEALs.
Oh, don't
deep
tell
diving,
me that. Don't tell me. Let's just say commercial diving. We don't want to
Yeah.
give Navy SEALs any credit.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Okay,
No
so
credit.
if we talk about the human challenges, right, that you have to solve, and there's a huge category for this, physics and engineering that I want to get into. But from a military domain, although I think if you really want to own Subterra, you're encompassing all of it, because you have to know what the civil advancements are, know what the challenges are. For the military, though, so if you stick a human down there, and let's not say fight, but operate, right? So you covered shoot, right? And this is what I tell people. And I actually didn't used to just use what you do about if you fire your weapon, it sucks oxygen and it replaces harmful chemicals, right? And this is why you go to a shooting range and a pregnant woman can't go into that. You know that? Like in our pregnant people can't go in a shooting range because the lead is in the air, and you can have really good HVAC system to sucking it out. But as soon as you start shooting anything, you're right, it sucks the oxygen and it replaces harmful chemicals. What I usually play with the shoot is because of again, more like going scuba diving, it's a compressurized environment. So you can't just use one layer of earplugs. Most operators who are prepared to shoot underground have either special hearing plugs or they have double layered, because you can give yourself concussion by firing your weapon underground because of the pressures, if you just think about it. So shooting is hard. You mentioned communicating, right? So this gets to the technological aspect I cover in some of my writings. That what I usually tell people when I go out to visit them is that everything you're carrying, soldier, won't work underground, because it's usually relying on some type of satellite, some type of radio frequency, line of sight that's exchanging. Like you said, the mesh network is a solution to it. But I mean, it's just a really great way to, everything that they have wasn't made for and most likely won't work, especially for communicate. But we do shoot, move, and communicate. So moving. So just knowing where you're going. And it's not, again, we're going to operate underground. So it's not just knowing where you are, the soldier or the formation, which there is no GPS because it's satellite enabled. Usually, I mean, you pull a string with you. So there's some firefighting techniques that I've learned from New York City about the different techniques, how they try to keep track of the soldiers. But that's the other element, is that not only knowing where that soldier is knowing who's commanding that element, knowing where that formation is. And I actually asked this again, going back to the 98th, kind of flipping the script, is like, how did you keep track? And then my friend Joe, like, you're leaving people or a mesh network at every turn, everything like that. So if you're trying to command somebody underground, although we have an element of the subterranean, if you know the submarine warfare for our nuclear, they're true masters of the ocean, and nobody knows where they're at, and they'll come up to send a signal. Again, it goes back to that's very similar to what you would need in a Subterra, but how do you command and control an element that's in that domain and know where they are, especially if you're maneuvering on the surface or dropping things on the surface or things like that. So that whole element. And then lastly, I say the other challenge of operating underground is there is no dispersion, right? So that's why one bad guy at the end of one tunnel can hold it, because all I got to do is point and spray. I don't have to be a marksmanship. And if it's a machine gun and I have HVAC, I guess, because it's going to release a lot there's no dispersion. So how do you operate in that environment? There's this long list of challenges. But Greg, I know you've been so patient.
Oh, it's all good.
I want to talk about, because I love, this is usually where we'll stop in the military. We'll stop there. Like, yeah, but what if you want to dig a tunnel? Like, what are the challenges of creating Subterra for you to operate? And I know of a few, but I'm sure I'm clueless.
Yeah, I mean, obviously one of the challenges is time, right? So, I mean, we talked about that. And how quickly do you need something, right?
Yeah.
Because with enough time, you can kind of accomplish whatever you want. And obviously, in certain cases, when you need it, it is one of those challenges. So, and that's something where I think pushing this now is that's one of the things, right? Because okay, now we can determine and hopefully get people on board with. And some of these things will have the aspect of time on your side where, okay, we could put some time into planning and we could start implementing some things, with time on our side. But obviously, on the other side of things is just the challenges of the digging in general, right? The different geological challenges, right? So, obviously the Earth's crust is full of different geologies, right? And those will cause some different challenges, and most of which like we probably don't know of, and we're about to start getting into ourselves and pushing the limits on some of these things. But obviously, getting through rock or soft soil or sand, right? You've got everything to deal with there. So, I mean, thankfully, a lot of these things, a lot of them we don't have to solve. Like, a lot of great engineering has been done before us, right? And so, there's a lot of good information out there for us to kind of start with. And then, we're gonna probably hit some limits and push them and try to learn from them and maybe implement some different solutions. But yeah, I mean, like I think the known challenges are there, and they're somewhat obvious, right? And I think I started with time, and that's one of the things that people probably think of, like, oh, well, it's going to be so slow to do whatever it is you need to do. And I think on that forefront, we're going to start exploring different, not necessarily new methodologies, but implementing. Obviously, smaller diameter things can potentially go faster than larger diameter things, right? Less soil to remove. There's certain things where, certain methods where you don't need to remove the spoils at all, whether that's just from using compressive tools, compaction, different things that can move the soil around them and not have to actually displacement tools rather. And obviously those come with other limitations, whether, if they're powered by pneumatics, right? Pneumatics can only take you so far, but there's lots of different things that we're going to start testing and exploring to kind of achieve different results. So, and again, I think depending on what you need, that will kind of form how we approach the attack. But implementing, underground structures, whether from using TBMs or different tools like that, obviously, and those vary in size, right? There's micro TBMs from a couple feet wide to I think 50 feet or so in diameter. So. But yeah, lots to explore there and definitely go down for sure.
Now,
So
I'll just add, sorry, that I think that's been like a lot of the interesting work that we've been doing in Traysar is, many times I feel like my work with Greg is, Greg is kind of like, well, tell me what you need and we'll figure it out. And then, what you start realizing is that, and you were kind of mentioning this, you were talking about like the way people understand is you compare it to submarines or you compare it to planes. There's whole industries that, this is, we were talking about Elon companies. You don't reinvent the wheel. You go in and you understand what exists and you build off of it. So, a lot of times when we're kind of digging deep in what exists and what is out there, what you just see is that the financial incentive and the methodology bases the whole technology on two elements. It bases it on time, meaning many times almost the financial incentive in the civilian infrastructure world is rewarded by it taking time, meaning it's not for a fact that a lot of companies would want things to go faster. This is kind of where I feel, Greg could talk about this more, the Boring Company kind of changed an approach, in disrupting the market, but also logistical footprint above ground. And then, the moment you have limitless ability to place generators and, all kinds of other elements. So a lot of times, what our work is I need to go and explain military constraints, right? If we're in a battlefield, we're not going to build a factory in the battlefield, or we're not going to take 3 months to build access. So it's almost the two elements that in the civilian world have been the biggest advantage, where it was like, we're not going to focus on this. This is exactly where we as a company have to focus, and that means we're going to pay prices in other areas, and we're going to solve it in that area. So it's almost a switch around from the civilian to the military, where my job is to bring, the military approach. And, I think also, John, you've been really helping with that in like, okay, let's think about this in military terms.
Right.
And then our engineers could really understand, at the start be horrified by the ramifications of that, but then start building interesting technology to solve it.
I think that's exactly right. So even if I don't think we're done listing all the challenges, then we can address how has the civilian world addressed that challenge. And then some of them, they just haven't. And I forgot to talk about survive in the underground. So shoot, move, communicate, survive is for the military. So the aid, if you have a casualty down there, how do you get the casualty out? I've been a part of, now it's been years from now, experiments. And they did some experimenting, shoving soldiers underground. And the one thing they said they wanted was winches. So if they found, which you could create, if you thought about it differently, if they found in order to pass resupply or to take casualties, that they would just find a shaft, if most people are familiar with, but they needed something on the surface that they could drop a winch down to pull it out. So they figured out in that experiment that we did that one of the things that we needed that we didn't have was a winch on every vehicle, so that if you needed to drop resupply or pull somebody out, you could have a military winch. I'm fascinated if we really were to shift people's minds about need to be able to create Subterra based on survivability as much. All right. One, you mentioned something that I think is vital, and I was talking about this weekend as well. I was working for a 4-star general. We were looking at everything for the military as advisor for a 4-star, and one of the other 4-stars that came in that dealt with kind of procurement and acquisitions, which I never want to be in that world. He goes, everybody wants to talk about thinking about outside the box. Most people don't know what's in the box. So this is what we're going to talk a long time about, what's in the box. And then we're going to talk about how you're trying to get outside the box. But there's just, because of the lack of military expertise, very few people know what's in the box, let alone know what's outside our box in the civilian world's box. And this is the expertise that's missing. You mentioned time, which I think is great because depending on what scale, we talked about the snail. Of course, if you think about the boring company, if somebody you to Google that, you're talking these massive civilian boring machines to dig tunnels you can drive through. Time is always going to be a factor, which is, I think, can be played with on. I've always asked sapper geologists, well, how fast does it take to dig a tunnel? Like, well, where? Yeah. Right, and this, how fast, if it's Vietnam or some parts of Gaza, not all parts of Gaza actually, but some parts, if it's that clay that doesn't need to be, or the bracing is less complex as you dig and how you brace. And I know the boring machine, that was a big challenge, is as you're digging, something has to replace that void to be the security of it. And Hamas created a long time ago this very standardized 3-section bracing element of the wall and the moon on the top. Geology, of course, being the challenge of creating a new void in the space. I think the tools that you have available would be another big challenge that you have to address, because in tools becomes, the size of it, the cost of it, the specialization of it. It's a specialized piece of equipment. It's not commercial off the shelf, although I know hopefully we get to talk about some of the mining equipment that you guys went to. The environment, like you said, if it's a contested environment, it's going to be harder to get things. But some of the things that I know a little bit about, Greg, but I know that when creating a new void, there is that issue you talked about, which is displacement. Because I always get this about, why didn't they know that Hamas was digging? Where are they putting the dirt? Because everybody, if they know a little bit about digging, is that if you create a void, you got to do something with the spoil that's done. And then, so I want to ask you about kind of your thoughts about that aspect of displacement and spoil, that from digging the hole, and heat, depending on what device you are. I've heard that if we're talking about like some serious digging, it creates heat at the point of where you're digging if it's not a guy digging with his hands or something.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Obviously, on the displacement front, I think like in the civilian market, I want to say it's limited in diameter. So I mean, and that could be something that we continue exploring at Traysar. I think we're looking at drilling right now, but we've done a little bit of testing with soil displacement tools as well.
It's like sometimes it's just like conveyor belt, right? Of like Like in the coal mine, I just think about the rocks just like, shoo,
Yeah. So as far as like if you're pulling the spoils out, people use conveyor belts. Some people use like train cars and actual like muck cars, and you just
right.
kind of fill up a box and move it out. So definitely different methods there. Conveyor belts seem to be one of the more ideal ones for long
Can you
distances. But
pulverize it and like vaporize it?
you can, I guess depending on what method you're using, I mean, and then also what soil you're in. If you're in rock, it's normally kind of coming out in crumbles on a conveyor belt or whatever. In clay, you might be mixing with bentonite or some other polymers or something like that, and kind of getting it to more of a liquid substance, so you could either convey it out or pump it out. But yeah, definitely lots of challenges there for sure. And then if you're trying to hide those, that becomes a whole different challenge, right? If you're not,
Right, 'cause I
don't
guess this is a different challenge as I start to go to the sci-fi and not get ahead of myself on. I was a part of the DARPA Underminer project as like a historical advisor, and whether it was meeting a warfighting challenge. The DARPA Underminer project was about punching a small diameter hole up to 400 meters, I think it was. Very limited in scale. Their idea was the Battle of Mogadishu, Black Hawk Down. Soldiers were dying because they were running out of blood. They couldn't get them to this. They said that they could create a certain side of the hole. It wasn't far though. They were literally talking from like cutoff block to cutoff block. And then they did they do a call out, and these are the key performance indicators, the specifications of the challenge, because they think, and then the different types of ways you would dig that hole. But if the Underminer comes from one of my kids' favorite movies, of course, Incredibles, where there's this guy who's he has a machine that he's digging, but it isn't the boring company because he doesn't want to leave a void behind him for anything. He just wants to get that thing somewhere. Can you talk to me about the difference and the challenges of just trying to, like, if you were to drop a Underminer robot, which is the Palmer Luckey kind of conversation was about, of course, he believes in the next 5 to 10 years, and we're already there. I mean, the surface will become so lethal that we'll be fighting in the crust of the earth. But he also remembers back to the Soviet army that wanted to create this. And if you look at the picture, I don't know if that's where the Incredibles got it or vice versa, but the Incredibles Underminer machine looks exactly like this Soviet nuclear-powered digger. My question, thinking through the Subterra challenges, is that's not meant to do the boring machine, create a highway. And I don't know if have you ever been to the North Korean tunnel?
Oh, yeah, I want to go.
Yeah, the tunnel number
A lot
3,
of traveling to do.
which is really, when I was in the Erez tunnel, it's an invasion tunnel. So North Korea dug, they say, up to 7 invasion tunnels. So these massive, almost boring machine level that you could flow tens of thousands of troops through. And they left one open as like a tourist site, literally. It's a tourist site. You can go watch. It's really cool. And I really enjoyed it. But I know that has to be different of what it would take to have a machine like the boring machine that creates a space that big. I'm sure that's not what North Korea used. Versus the Underminer, which was about getting a device through the crust of the earth. But he doesn't care about the spoil. So is that feasible to have a digging machine that's digging underground at a certain depth, and you don't have to care about where the spoil goes because it's just creating a path and it collapses behind him?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, I think we might be getting into the futuristic, which I think is part of the goal. But I think along the lines of, the existing displacement tools, right? They're displacing and not removing, right? So the tools exist, but I think we're gonna have to push the limits on those to like get them to be, I think currently, we tested with a tool that can do like 150 feet where, no soil needs to come out, right? You can just
push
this thing through the ground, kind of like that.
Yeah.
You don't need anything, right? Although this one was powered pneumatically, right? And kind of has a piston inside. But so, yeah, things do exist where you can do that, where that doesn't have to come out. But I think for that to be longer distance, maybe larger diameter and different things, there's some engineering to do, I think. But
yeah, what some people miss in that like belief is that the moment you're breaking apart Earth when it's underground, it's very condensed.
Yeah.
So the moment you're breaking it, it grows in its velocity much larger than the actual space it was taking when it's condensed, especially in rock. I mean, all these
So that's
formations.
what it pushes, like a gopher, like pushes the ground up. It's
Yeah.
creating this
Exactly.
space up.
So, if the ground was too hard in theory, that may not work, right? I mean, or become a lot more difficult anyway. That's for sure. So,
So the further you go, I mean, basically the further you go, you're starting to create much more mass than what was originally there, because unless you have a mechanism, and these are all kind of crazy conversations we've had, unless you have something that knows how to condense that back to its original formation, at some point you're creating way more mass in the structure that you just dug
yeah.
than what you're doing, and it fills up at a certain point. So that's, a little
Does
bit
that
of-
increase heat when it starts to fill up?
Well, it just gets blocked. It starts, filling up from around.
heat would definitely increase for sure as that
Yeah.
becomes more difficult as you dig further. And yeah.
What's the normal type? So this is my few, again, experiences with the diggers, knowing that the Hezbollah digging machine was basically a version of a diamond tip almost. Is that normal for the tips of digging machines to be made of some super concentrated
Something
device?
hard, yeah. I mean, generally chromium carbide is a common thing, or tungsten carbide is used. I know in offshore drilling, diamond bits are used a lot. So, yeah, you definitely hard things because the ground wears. Even in soft ground, where it's like, oh, it's just soft ground, but like it all wears your tools out, and that's a challenge of digging and digging far. And that if your tool wears out, you can no longer dig. So that means you either need to have something that hard lasts forever. We'll develop some unobtainium cutter heads, but otherwise you have to either be able to have a means of changing that. So it means you either have to be able to get to it, or you have to be able to bring it back and then replace whatever has worn out. Because yeah, I mean, if your tool no longer cuts, you're done. So that's a big challenge. One of the biggest challenges for sure is just the tool you're using at the front. So yeah, you want to start with something, whether that's diamond, chromium carbide, or some, they make some different matrices of diamond mixtures that kind of last a long time. So yeah, that's certainly a challenge for sure.
Here's one you probably didn't think of, but having to understand there's multiple elements of Russia and Ukraine that are kind of going World War I-esque, but with a modern technology aspect to it. During World War I, of course, both sides were telling at each other, and there were, there's the Netflix show. What's the guy? Tommy.
Oh, Peaky Blinders.
Peaky Blinders was a World War I
Yeah.
tunnel digger,
Yeah.
and he has nightmares because they ran into each other.
Yeah,
So
like
both
fighting in like a
that's right.
2-foot
They
crawl
started-
space.
because they had these two mining. So that's happening actually, and there's two things happening in Russia and Ukraine that we haven't talked about. One is there's at least 4 different spots. Most people don't understand that Eastern Ukraine is full of gas lines, where Russia has tried to infiltrate. Again, beyond the fortress of the not just the dead man zone, but actually to get past the castle wall, they've multiple times sent soldiers through gas lines, which is already present in the underground, and done that. The other thing is that when they're digging, which we haven't talked about, the challenge is they have to dig it quietly because of the advancements in acoustics. And if you know World War I, what happened is they developed acoustic. They would put their ear. Some soldier was assigned to stop and see if they could hear the other people digging. And again, Peaky Blinders, they ran into each other. How does that impact some of the things you're developing? Are you even thinking about digging quietly?
Yeah, we could probably go through. Again, it'll depend on the application, right? Like if this is like a stealth mission, then yeah, obviously that's a huge factor because you're going to be game over before you start almost, right? But I mean, I think a lot of other aspects, it may not be a requirement, right? Because we might be doing things for survivability or infrastructure wise, but yeah, if stealth is a part of it, then
Yeah, I mean,
that'll be a big deal.
It is something we spoke about, and I think that this is also, in many ways, our calling to the military because, it's kind of funny, but as a company that believes that Subterra is becoming a domain and it's not there yet in military, sometimes, and this is a very bad thing, I'm the one writing almost the doctrine, right? Or, I consult
Coming up
with
with the
you.
requirement, right?
Yeah.
This is the challenge that even DARPA, if there's not a customer, they have a really bad time of deciding to do a project because they're like, well, does the customer want that? Sometimes I love DARPA actually, because they get to do cool things to try to break where are the barriers in sciences, which hopefully we get to talk to in this field, like the Underminer, but they also did the Subterranean Warfare challenge, Subterranean Challenge, which was a 5-year program about mapping. I know you probably have a few things to say about that. I was involved, like saying like how important it was, and I was on the videos and kind of advising, like, would the military need this, right? Because it has a search and rescue civilian application about mapping underground. But the problem with DARPA is that not a lot of their projects make it to customer because they even developed it and say, this will help you. I'm like, I don't want that. Even though so it's not that the Army tells them what to work on, they're actually trying to break sciences, which I think you're doing a little bit of both, where because you lived some of it, are solving real challenges that you've experienced in your career, but you're also looking at knowing where some of the barriers in both military and civilian in Subterra domain are, saying like, I'd like to approach that, like Palmer mentioned with the Soviets stopped their project, right? It was a nuclear powered and the science wasn't there actually. And there's been a few places where breakthroughs will happen because somebody actually had the big, hairy, audacious goal of right now. So I want to add a 2-part question. Why don't you talk to me about what you're working at Traysar on creating solutions for known problems that the IDF face or other people would face today, and what are the scientific barriers that could be, if assigned to somebody, thought through differently to try to overcome those scientific barriers?
Yeah, so I'll start off and say that the strategy of Traysar, and it's actually interesting you mentioned DARPA, because this has actually been very exciting for us. Is DARPA just announced RFI, it just closed, but we of course we submitted to it, but about new alternatives for penetration munitions, moving away from kinetic to different shock propagation methodologies, which we have I won't talk about it here in the podcast, but we have some interesting ideas there that through our technology we think we could implement and use. So that also, this change in mind, and I think there's a reason why it came out right now, as we could imagine, and why DARPA are now proposing it. But that's definitely something that we're going to be doing. But in general, Traysar's strategy, I like to call it the pincer maneuver, or scissors maneuver for those who don't know the pincer maneuver. But basically, we have to do both. We have to go bottom up and top bottom. Bottom up, we have to go to end military users, understand their pain points, not limit it to Subterra. Again, if I believe that Subterra is a domain, thereby it's my job to prove how Subterra solves, just like anyone in the Air Force, could go and say, well, the air area will solve this. This is exactly like the Underminer project where you said, okay, let's deliver logistic support through the Subterra domain. So we have to go to end users bottom down. We have to see how we're solving from them real problems through Subterra technology. So I'll give like a very small example. If you have units in Arctic conditions that are dealing with disbursement of energy or data, and they don't know how to do it, and they're looking mostly at batteries, how do you give a new approach of spreading utility lines that are protected underground quickly, and quick deployment of airfields and things like that? So that's, one way of doing it. And our goal here is to slowly bottom up, show how Subterra is solving these problems, and also getting, the limitations if we're going into runway denial. So how much is noise a factor? How much, and then we have to consider noise. And, like everything in the world, everything comes at a price, but it's possible. So, a lot of times the technologies that we're working on today, we can make them significantly, less loud if they move slower. If we want them to move fast, many times they'll be louder in different areas. So these are all kinds of things. These are like the nitty gritty that are crucial. But a lot of times what our job is to show and say, hey, this is what we have. This is, if we're talking TRL, this is a TRL 1 or 2 that we're working on. Now give us, tell us why it's a bad idea. Tell us that it's bad because it's too loud, and then we'll solve it for you. Or don't tell us that it's bad because it's loud, but tell us you need it 1,000 feet longer, to get to, and then, we'll do that. So that's a lot of the bottom up that we're doing. The other thing, and this is, is doing the top down. It's talking to decision makers, it's talking to thought leaders, and really pushing this idea that Subterra is a domain. And the quicker and faster that we invest in this domain, the more we'll be prepared to do it. So that's in general about our strategy. Today, the technologies that we can talk about, we probably have over. I wrote already over 40 technologies that are TRL2. I literally have like a spec sheet for them, but I felt like my job in many ways was, if I believe this is a domain, I should be able, and I'm not satisfied enough. I think I should be coming up with another 200 of these products. But if it's a domain, there has to be many products, right? If people invented the plane, so people invented the SAM missile, so people invented the stealth, and it's a never-ending race. If it's a domain, it will be technologies running after each other. We'll be seeing more seismic sensors being laid in the ground to detect movement, et cetera, et cetera. So that's, a big part of the job. What we have today that's, you could say, at a TRL 7 is just, this element of maneuvering through the Subterra that we were talking about, how difficult and how challenging it was. And what we did here, again, is actually stop and say, wait. And this is a lot of times I think the Army does, at least the Israeli Army does this mistake, is they look at a challenge and they say, oh, let's invent a solution rather than stopping for 1 minute. And this is how we solved the detection. Most of the detection was solved through learning from what exists in the civilian world and implementing it for military use cases. So we did the same. We went and we said, let's see what's in the mining world. At the end of the day, the mining world are literally maneuvering in very challenging terrains. And they have to use a huge amount of force, and they have to overcome literally a wall that they're digging through. So there must be areas here that we could learn from. And we found different machinery from Sweden, from Germany, that's basically very small machinery that still has a force factor of regular heavy equipment. We took one of these machines, we literally strapped onto it all kinds of technologies, showed what happens. And one of the gaps that I really felt that was happening in Gaza is you see these amazing videos of like drones that go inside tunnels and are maneuvering.
I saw one in
very
Lebanon
impressive.
that was impressive.
Incredible,
Recently.
incredible. And there's very high level of also flying capabilities there and really amazing work being done there. But the moment you get to like a full blast door, the moment you get to, Hamas are purposely collapsing, and this is also Iran, they're purposely collapsing areas because they don't want you to get access and maneuver for. So how do you bring the element of heavy engineering and force factor, not just maneuverability, into the equation? So we're building heavy machinery that's robotic based. I don't like calling it a robot, but it's basically a robotic mini excavator that could maneuver through a Subterra structure. It has a very versatile arm, so it has many different use cases that it could use, and could literally clear through rubble that's been purposely collapsed. It could go through a blast door through different combinations of both hammers and thermal breaching. And it could basically give the ability that regular engineering capabilities of like operating an excavator to do that within a structure. So what our vision is you're actually giving the engineering core ability. They're the ones that are going to be maneuvering through Subterra structures, not tier 1 units. And the reason they're the ones that are going to do it is they know how to use heavy machinery and excavators. We're going to give them the ability to operate as if they're sitting on it, live. But they're going to go through structures. They're going to have different sets of tool cases that they could use and basically clear through a structure, get to where they need to do. And also we're building demolition capabilities such as drilling that could insert explosives and things of that sort. So these are all, things that we're working on that element there. But then, what we're really excited to focus on, and this is the next thing that I won't go too much into detail is basically we're entering the drilling world. As at the end of the day in Traysar, we have 3 classes. We have excavator class, which is more maneuverability and robotics within Subterra, the Subterra domain. But by the way, also there's a lot of things that you could do, not just to fight within Subterra, but you could, for example, dig your own, ditches or things like that. We have the drilling world, which is smaller diameter, faster capabilities, but still that could carry payloads. And then we have the boring class, which is, what we see ourselves very quickly getting into, which is larger diameter tunnels where we even see ourselves maneuvering troops and, things of that sort through the crust of the earth. So right now we're focusing on the drilling world. And the idea is, and just like planes, and, I said this at the beginning, no one's asking, can a plane carry people or bombs or logistics? It could do all of those. that's kind of what we're creating. We're creating different vehicles that can move through the earth at different diameters and carry different payloads, whether it's an explosive that could hit an underground structure and blow up, or could carry a logistic like you described in the Underminer, or an array of sensors that could both warn troops of what's going to be ahead of them, give geologists the understanding of the stability of the earth, if they could even try to have tanks go through or they'll be stuck, and things of that sort, to quickly spreading utility lines and data centers so that, we continue to have comms and communication. So right now we're working on a smaller diameter vehicle, and we're going to take it to the vehicle. We hope you could come and visit and see us break stuff. Definitely going to be breaking a lot of stuff, and then take it from there.
One, yes, of course. I actually bought, like I said, I bought land in Colorado.
We would love to come in.
What you just gave me about 10 things to circle back to. And this is the way my brain works. Although, number one, about bunker busters. As far as my infantry grunt mind knows, there's two ways to bunker busters work. One, kinetic energy, so they're really heavy, so they punch through the earth. And the other one is explosive force, either in front of it, so it can go farther, or once it's punched a certain depth, really heavy things. Most people, and we had to, I enjoy this when things come up that the general population wants to know, and you have to go be able to articulate quickly about that kinetic. Why are they so heavy? It's not the explosives they're carrying, it's because they're trying to penetrate the ground through kinetic energy and then explode, or explode and then explode again, or you drop 4 or 5 of them and do what I'd say Israel kind of patented, I guess, is drilling. And most, whether it's Nasrallah or whoever, but where they drop one, it goes a little bit. So everyone's like, what's the depth of one bunker buster? Well, it's this. But if you drop one and you drop another and you drop another, you can literally drill your way with bunker busters down to a depth. There's a limit. I don't know what the limit is. I'm sure there's a limit of where that will work.
Actually, it's a limit of just how much munitions you have.
Is it?
There's literally targets that if we would do it in that methodology, we wouldn't have any more bunker busters.
Right, because how many did we drop on, or not we, how many did you, Israel, drop on Mohammed Sinwar? It was wasn't it 30, or and Nasrallah, but it was it was 30 seconds of
Yeah, Australia was 80.
80.
And 80 was sometimes, I won't go too much into detail, but that could be close to what we did in a month in certain cases.
Yeah. And then I thought for Mohammed Sinwar, it was 50 and 30 seconds as well. Or something.
Yeah, Muhammad was so tough because he was hiding literally. This kind of brings me to your whole weird conversation with Pierce Morgan, but
don't give me
I don't want to. But literally, he was in a tunnel below a hospital.
That's right.
And
the world said he wasn't, even though they
pictures.
They took the drone. Here's the Al Nasser Hospital. And here's the tunnel. No proof that it was.
And that's always what's where you want to because I won't go too much into this, but I know how much time we knew where he was, and I know when we carried out that bombing, and the difference of time is the equation of how positive we could be 100% that we weren't going to harm too much that hospital, and how much we risked in special ops lives to be sure about that. But that's another great
so the
example
drilling,
of that.
it literally is drilling, but with explosives. But is the idea that you could drop something that starts digging into the ground and then blow it up?
Yeah, that's Greg, you want to talk about it?
Asher mentioned he's got this playbook of products, and
right.
that's certainly an idea.
Yeah.
Where it goes, I don't think we've put a ton into yet, but you drop something and then it starts, whether has a engine of its own or motor or pneumatic attachment or something, and then can start penetrating its way down. And maybe you can delete the need for 80 bunker busters, and this thing can, get its way down there. And then
it has to survive the drop, though. It had to survive the kinetic energy of the drop.
Yeah. So definitely a thought, and in the product line.
All right, let me do my circle here. 2, one thing you mentioned that I've covered a little bit in my different podcasts, to include soldiers who have been standing, not Yahalom, which I know that, and again, most people don't get this, the culture is really what you try to break as well with Subterra domain. Even in the IDF, I approached that, depending on who I talked to, what unit, that it was a culture of do not go into that tunnel unless you're actively pursuing somebody being taken into the tunnel. It's like, get to it, stop, which is it's a cultural thing. As much as in the U.S. military, I've always, some of my articles, I put like a tunnel and then a soldier. Okay, like what does he have? What doctrine, training, equipment, everything. So one of the things you made me think about was just having a playbook of field expedient ways. If you treat this as a domain as much as we have now the Space Force and develop specialists in it, and you could have a playbook of field expedient things. Like if you don't have all that specialists, and I used to talk about wired communication, like, and I went looking, we got rid of it all, like we call it DR8, and a spool of wire that you would just run wire through it. People talk about the wired drones. Well, underground for communication, it's what used to be. Literally in the 80s and 90s, we used it. We decided we don't need that anymore. But field expedient ways to communicate. You said power, so there are field expedient ways. Like, well, you can also just run power. And if you were, again, you had the expertise, it's not in the doctrine, of even navigating, like I said, everything from the fire departments, they specialize in confined spaces operations and contested or fire and smoke and things like that, where they have tactics of a rope that they carry. So for us, it's like a cord. There are all these field expedient things. 3, which I actually want to cover before I go on to my 4, 5, and 6. You mentioned you were part of the finding and mapping the tunnels. Mm-hmm. If you know the Subterranean Warfare Challenge, it was about inserting a robotic into an environment to map a tunnel and communicate that back to the operator. They ended with like a cool robot dog or whatever it was that was not applicable to the military because it costs so much that you stick that down there. If I'm the guy in the tunnel, I blow that thing up and now you're out. How hard is it? So it's just 2 questions. To find a tunnel. And what are the challenges for that? Because there's got to be some geology, right? And some limitations. Understanding Operation Northern Shield, and when they found how much of a challenge it was from acoustics to radar to things like that. How hard it is to find a tunnel, and then how hard it is to map a tunnel.
Yeah, so I'll just give a quick side note because you brought it up, and I quickly want to mention.
That's what I'm doing right here. Like,
it's always going back and forth. I think one of the mistakes that sometimes people do is they're excited by elite expertise, forgetting that the mission is that it's not an elite expertise. A lot of the thought that we had in creating this excavator class maneuverability, robotic within a Subterra structure is that no longer, what I was seeing a lot of times in Gaza, is you get to, a team would get to entrance in the tunnel. Okay, stop. Let's wait for Yahalom to come and deal with it. That's not good.
No,
they could be
stops
sitting
maneuver.
stagnant.
Yeah.
It takes the unit is exhausted because they're going, especially in Gaza, from one place to the other. So a lot of times, the mission is, and this is also what I think militaries have to understand is it's almost like a cycle where you want to build the expertise, but then you want to take technology to bring it back. That it's no longer a specialized expertise. It's a doctrine and it's a way of fighting. So just like. Today, every, unit, like also, sorry that I say this, Marines and the Army, they have engineering capabilities of how do you clear through certain pathways? How do you, lay airfields? All kinds of like things that they're already doctrine. They're not expertise. That's what we have to be doing to Subterra. So that's just aside. I think that, a lot of times when we're talking about Subterra warfare, so I would define it as like a process. And this is, I think, a lot of things that Israel was slowly like learning in this thing. So you have number one is how do you detect a tunnel? That's number one. It's a whole world in itself. Then you have how do you map out that tunnel? That's a whole other world. It's not the same thing.
That's right.
To find something is very different. A lot of times I personally, because in Gaza, a lot of times what we do is we would drill holes into a tunnel. I would literally drill, like it was a very embarrassing incident, but like I was able to drill a hole in a tunnel. And then the chief of staff of the army came and we were drilling a hole like literally 10 feet next to it. And I said, oh yeah, this like, it's just 10 feet there we're going to hit. So like chief of staff of the army is there and we miss and we don't hit. So to even hit 10 feet forward is a whole expertise of itself. So then you have that. Then you have how to, access and maneuver through that structure if you want to after you mapped it. And then you have to destroy it. These are all,
I'm coming to destroy it. That's my third one.
World of itself. So detection, basically the way we approach detection, and people could use their imagination, but I won't give them too much ideas, is that a tunnel is not just a piece of air in the middle of the ground. It's built out of certain components. The geology works in a certain way. It is a formation of ground and then air. So you could imagine, that what we're looking for is not a tunnel. We're looking for a physical, a physics anomaly that there's no reason we would see it underneath the earth other than explaining that it's a tunnel. That's the way we approached finding a tunnel. And by the way, I think this is like a shift that happened in the IDF that's very cool is, you have UMINT and you have OSINT. Today in the Israeli army, we have something called PHYSINT. It's how do you gather intel through physics? And that's a lot of tunnel detection is actually, we're not looking for tunnels. We're looking for anomalies. We're looking for errors. Now, the reason that, where does that get challenging? When the anomaly could be a tunnel, but a lot of times it can't be. So for example, up north, we had 1 million crastic caves. So a lot of times we said, oh, we see a piece of air in the middle of a mountain. Amazing, we found a tunnel. We would dig in, saw some of the coolest caves I've ever seen in my life. But they were not tunnels, unfortunately. I wish I could still get approval to drill in them and find them, but stalactites and stuff like that. But so that's challenge number one. A lot of this, I can say a lot of the way we've changed the approach is a lot of these sensors, they're just limited by their reach of how far they could, find whatever it is that they're trying to.
How deep or how far away?
How far away. So if you're above ground, that's how deep it is. So the moment we started bringing in drilling, so suddenly something that's 80 feet below you, we shifted it so it might be 5 feet next to you. So if the limitation of it was a 7 or 10 feet, that's how far it could find the anomaly of what you're trying to find. So you would never find it from above ground, but then if you dig it, so a lot of times people think the drilling was to try to get access and just punch a hole in the tunnel. No, a lot of times, most of the drills we do, we know we're not going to hit the tunnel, but that changes the whole vertical of it. So we're not finding something 80 feet below us, finding something 5 feet, 2 feet next to us until we're able to hit it. So that's a lot of it. And then mapping, that's a whole world in itself is, the DARPA approach was something that moves within and is carrying the sensor. So it's slowly, a lot of challenges there. Like, for example, a lot of people ask me about LiDAR. Well, a lot of times in a tunnel, you have so much dust accumulating and so many things that.
What's the depth of LiDAR can penetrate? Ground penetrating radar?
I mean, ground penetrating radar. It all depends on size.
I don't know the full definition.
I mean, LiDAR is like more, what you're seeing on autonomous cars. It's shooting lasers and receiving it and then building a picture of what it has. So if you have something supposedly that runs through a tunnel, it could give you the whole structure of the tunnel. But then it's literally shooting lasers. So if you have too much dust or all kinds of things.
What about steel? If it hits steel.
Yeah. So all kinds
I have an episode on seeing through concrete. And it's really cool because police will slap something against the wall, but if steel reinforced concrete, you're not doing that because it bounces the radar off.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, sorry.
So then a lot of times we would ask ourselves, what do they have in this tunnel that we could leverage to continue finding whatever it is that we're looking for? I won't go too much into detail of that, but it's so many, and the main thing, and this is, I think, again, this is where you're creating a domain and you're creating a doctrine, is the realization that there isn't one way to do things, and you have to use many, many different ways and many different methodologies, and a lot of times combine them together in order to get, what it is that you want. And the moment and the danger of a lot of these is sometimes, the way we would map certain things, if they knew that this is how we were mapping it, it would be very, very easy for them to stop us from doing that. And that was, this kind of chicken and the egg where we didn't even want them to know that we were able to map these structures because we knew that it's a never-ending game, just as you said, that everyone's watching, that they're gathering information on how we're mapping these tunnels, bringing it back, and then, challenge through that.
But let's solve a myth on this, because I get this a lot of people like, wasn't there just like a cartoon big mound next to the opening where they dumped all the spoil? That's not how you're finding the tunnel, by finding the spoil.
No, so, this is like, we knew where they were digging from, but just because we knew where they were digging from, that doesn't mean we knew where they were digging to.
Yeah.
And what's cool and kind of sad, and we could combine a lot of things together, is that they weren't trying to hide that they were digging.
Right.
We knew that they were digging and digging.
Right.
By the way, there are technologies today that unfortunately, some were used, but not enough used, But there was a lot of things that I think we could have done. Like we were shocked by the extent of the tunnel. But when you think about it, just like you said, Hamas, the way they build a tunnel is 2 concrete segments in a thing. If you had satellite imagery every day, you would know how many segments were put in each day.
Yeah.
And if you calculated that each one of these segments is a certain length, you could calculate more or less how much was being built.
I will say they got
a day.
sneaky and started putting their manufacturing of those products underground
Yeah.
to get over that.
Yeah. So these are like, but basically just because ground is coming out of some places doesn't mean.
Yeah. Or that a bunch of people are going into a place.
Yeah.
Because they're not going to like this opening here and everybody's going into it. It's usually in a building or whatever. So
And
a
by the
lot
way-
of people moving into a building could mean there's a tunnel. I know there is, like you said, all the different forms of intelligence. Like I know that was a part of some work as well. If Hamas can tell you that there's something important there, and then you might want to go look there.
Yeah.
But a lot of it also was human, where, from my own wording, you would never have found that tunnel if not there was somebody who came with you to tell you, go back, look there, and find a really big one.
Yeah, and that's that was the whole White Sparrow operation. Is we were going deeper and deeper in these tunnels to find the body of Hadar Goldin. So I'll give context. Hadar Goldin, the soldier in operation, in Kathlet in 2014, his body was kidnapped, and there were intel that he was being hid in this tunnel in Rafah, and it came to a point where we were literally breaking apart the tunnels because we were afraid that they maybe like took out a segment, dug his body in a side of the tunnel, and then rebuilt it. So we were literally for miles breaking apart tunnels, pushing in sticks to the earth to try to see where he was. And it really ended up that someone was able to point out, and we would have never found him otherwise, in some side of a tunnel that looked like it was collapsed, but actually was just collapsed with his body inside it. So that was the extent of what the IDF went through in order to find these, but also how challenging it is sometimes to, even find something.
And I know it's a bigger challenge. That's an amazing story. I actually didn't know that. I knew that somebody came back, and I thought they just pointed you to a different tunnel, not the same tunnel, but part of it.
Yeah, no, and it was very annoying because we were very close to there and we stopped. So if we would have continued, it's possible. So there's a lot of,
But so what I always ask is like, so I understand the drilling technique, and I actually even understand between Egypt and Gaza, in order to ensure that you got all the tunnels, that you dug a tunnel dug a drill every 8 feet for 10 miles to make sure you knew there was no cross-border tunnels between Gaza and Egypt. That's going back to the challenges of the environment. Are there anything new technologies to help you discover if there's a Subterra environment and you aren't able to get there? So in enemy-held territory, besides observing people going in and activity, is there limitations, of course, from putting radar on a drone or something like that? On how hard is it? And this is what I try to get to people, of knowing if there's a tunnel or whatever there, if you can't go to that spot.
So ground penetrating radar works very well, but it's not very good in. I mean, it's a matter of size, right? So if the more you have a larger antenna, you could suppose, and you're sending in different pulses, you could go deeper, but it's not something that goes very deep and very far.
Yeah.
So for example, if it's on a drone, that wouldn't work well at all, especially if you wanted something, for the depths that they're doing. So ground penetrating radar is actually not the obvious one, and it's not the one we're most using for the work we're doing. We use it at some instances for very specific work, but there's many elements of, I was hinting to this a little bit of like detecting a tunnel, but a lot of times you don't need to detect the tunnel, you need to detect the movement in the tunnel, right?
Okay.
Maybe that's sometimes easier as hearing,
Acoustics.
the movement,
Yep.
Seismic activity, things
Seismic,
like that.
yep. Which is very
It's
sensitive.
already, it's not classified anymore. Part of the underground wall that Israel dug was also a wall of seismic
That's right.
sensors.
Yep.
That we were able to detect, them even trying to come close and dig close to us, a tunnel. So
Which
a lot
gets
of stuff
to
like that.
the engineering aspect that I know now of. It's about water table. Because once you hit a water table, you're done digging.
Well, I mean, that's not entirely true. I mean,
We have underwater tunnels. I meant for like a asymmetric terrorist.
Yeah,
work, but
yeah. I mean, so unless you're using a tunnel liner, which again, so if you're if you're certain methodologies, yeah, you might be done. And again, it's going to depend on the application that you're going for, right? But yeah, if you are using like a traditional tunnel wall liner, you can obviously dig through the water table and continue going, but that might not
That's
be
why I'm happy
applicable.
he's on our side
That's
and
right.
not their
That's right.
side.
That's right.
We would be in trouble.
Because we do have, again, expanding our mind in the world not military. We have underground water cables. We have, of course, all of the actual driving tunnels that go underwater and through it. It's out there, but this is actually a question for you, and I don't know if it's one of my ideals, having done this, like in Kyiv, right? So Kyiv is this ancient city, and they used the subways to protect their entire population. They had like 100 babies born during the siege of Kyiv. They put their hospitals down there, everything. I went to the mayor and to the city administrator as I was, could the Russians have gotten into the underground and infiltrated? Because that's ancient, as I had that on my podcast as well, when King David's men used the water tunnel to infiltrate Jerusalem and go past the fortifications to take the city of Jerusalem, an ancient city of David. When I asked the city administrator, well, who has a map of the underground? Who knows what the underground is? Actually, in every major city I've ever been in, nobody knows what's underground. You'll find, like, you go to New York City, an MTA, that'll tell you, of course, they can tell you where the subways are. They may be able to tell you where the underground utility tunnels are. But in Kyiv, there is a subway, of course, but there is underground rivers. There's a map of that. There's Soviet bunkers that, like, kids you can hire to take you down into some of these. How would you create, like, the John Wick engineer? If you watch, I think it's John Wick 2, when he wants to go underneath the old catacombs, go through the catacombs. It's whether it's in France or whatever. Is there a way in the civilian world in which they enter an environment and then assess and can quickly understand if there's a presence of voids and spaces and all of that? And then could you apply that to any city from afar or on it to truly get a grasp of what's underneath our feet?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely a big one to unpack. And I think that's something that we're going to try to draw from existing techs and hopefully integrate into ours. And I think the offshore drilling is a big one that has a lot of understanding in that area, right? Because they're drilling for miles, looking for different pockets of whatever, and also avoiding dangerous pockets at the same time of certain things. So I think those are going to be some things that we want to explore ourselves and integrate. And then I Asher touched on it. I mean, size being one constraint, right? So if you're doing something with a large TBM, you're less constrained to like what tools you could put on it, right? So you might be able to do better things or detect things further away if you're using a large TBM because you don't have this limitation on size. But if we're using something that's only 7 inches in diameter, we may have larger constraints on what we can put in there and detect. But I think that's going to be one of the challenges that we push on, is potentially implementing things that are used in a larger medium and developing a way to use them on a smaller, more stealth-like device. But yeah, definitely
Also autonomous for like a lot of times, not to offend the military, but I'm a soldier myself. In the military, a lot of things have to be more dumb-proofed, because you're exhausted and you're fighting and you're not an expert. So you need things to work, more autonomously, more easily, that you could just press a button and it works. So that's, a lot of, what we're going to be focusing on. But I will say that, like, one thing that's interesting is I have a good friend, Jeremy, that he started a company called Exodigo. And Jeremy is one of the people that, like, contributed most to tunnel detection in the Army, it's kind of funny, the full cycle, because we took a lot of inspiration from the civilian world. Jeremy took it to a whole other level of detection, created a company called Exodigo, which is, I think, a unicorn by now. It's over $1 billion, where he's using a lot of technology to map out utilities in cities. He's doing the rail project in California, and he has people all over the U.S. in Israel who are doing exactly that. They're going to cities before construction projects, and they're using new technology in order to map it out. So that's kind of like, a little bit of, that. But I think that's another area. Oh, just, another thing that's very interesting is there's a lot of companies now that are going to the biological. So just now we found out more about the pyramids using a technology called, I might be pronouncing this wrong because I'm saying it in Hebrew, nayonim, but it's basically a chemical reaction that's able to understand over time what is actually looking like in the underground. We actually got a much better picture of the pyramids doing that. So there's a few very cool startups,
Nice.
Like I think a lot of also what we're trying to do in Traysar in general is if this is a domain, God forbid there's only one company, working. We have to we have to be bros working together, to everyone like pushing, to different things. So there's like a few very cool companies that are actually focused in this area. They're not in defense in particular. A lot of them are thinking about the mining world justifiably, but that is going to be something that we're going to use a lot, for military use case and partner with, just like we're going to help them maybe give them the machinery that enables them, to go further in what they're doing. So that's another area. But yeah, as Greg said, I think a huge element, and this is, you could also see this in the website, is we have to map. We have to have an understanding of the underground.
Yep.
That's a whole world of technology in itself. Then we have to, dig, and we have to know how to penetrate and be lethal. And then we have to know how to protect and, survivability. So that was like the element. And as you said, this whole mapping sensor, it's going to have to be an array. It's going to be a combination of many different, sensors and abilities, and to do it as Greg described, build that picture.
Yeah. It makes me think. So there was a Marine who wrote a really fascinating article because the U.S. military is an expedition. It's not going to understand the terrain because it's not their terrain, and usually it's foreign to them. But like in whether you're talking about Indo-Pacific, there was a Marine who wrote, because this concept of the Marine Corps is we've forgotten what World War II military subterranean there is. And there's a vast array of it because whether it's the Atlantic Wall or whatever, there's islands and all this stuff. If we're an expeditionary military for basing and things like that, he wrote this thing about using the existing subterranean throughout this major campaign if you knew where it was, and then whether it's properties and all that stuff. But somebody who does this a lot, even the cities aspect, most combatant commands don't even have people that understand the cities in those countries because they're only signed by country teams. I'd be remiss not to talk about smoke as a form of mapping. I know it's complex for me as somebody who's a law of war student of the law of armed conflict as well. They have a thing called purple hazing, where you stick smoke down a tunnel and where it comes out. But I'll ask you about it. Is it still a thing? But I also know most people don't know the reason that the U.S. military can't use tear gas as a method of warfare is because of how we used it in Vietnam as our kind of solution to not wanting to go in the underground. We just would literally pull up generators and pump tear gas into it. But that becomes indiscriminate because you don't know who and what is down there. And it became this big debate in the Senate about tear gas. But in that video I sent you, some of the ways to neutralize a tunnel was to pour tear gas powder down and then collapse the entrance down or pump it into it. Is using smoke to map tunnels still an option?
So it isn't anymore, also because, as you said, Sinwar has invested majorly in blast doors and turns. So basically now the smoke won't be able to go through to do it. What I can also say is we have other methodologies of kind of blowing through stuff and seeing where they come out. And it's actually been, I've had some very funny experiments on that because we had to prove that if someone were to die by that methodology, it wouldn't be by being, choking to death, but it would be by the, other elements that, of the explosion. So it's almost like we had to show that he dies in another way.
Oh, I do remember this.
Yeah.
It became a news article about gas.
Yeah. So it's something we're aware of and we don't, but the smoke isn't. But it actually takes me to another point, which I think is that, a lot of times, like, for example, let's take the submarine. Like, if you have a good way to hurt your enemy's strategic advantage, you could turn his strategic advantage into his own death trap. And I think that that's also in many ways, like we're seeing this a little bit in Russia, Ukraine, where they're throwing these like thermal,
That's right.
and it turns the whole complex into a death trap of its own.
Because it's to use thermobarics. So thermobarics suck the oxygen out of the room and replace it with fire. Basically, they call it a vacuum bomb or whatever. You're right. That would be in addition to this article about what the shift has been. Okay, well, how do you deal with the Russians infiltrating gas lines? There's a solution to that. Although some of them hurt themselves going through a gas line.
Yeah.
But the other way that Russia is dealing with subterranean is to increase the use of thermal barracks. If you go back to World War II, bunkers and tunnels using flamethrowers, but thermal barracks it's nasty business because it literally sucks the oxygen out and replaces it with fire. Is my crude explanation of it. But you're right. I failed to mention that as an evolution that we're seeing on the battlefield. Not a lot of reporting happening over there with doing that. Gruesome, legal, but gruesome.
Yeah.
Are you ready to take on the big task of how do you destroy a tunnel?
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay, so I asked you in my podcast, I already know the answer. What's harder, mapping a tunnel or destroying a tunnel? Having now written a lot about Gaza, and to be, would you also make this statement that we still don't know where all the tunnels are in Gaza?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was meeting with, I think it was the Gaza Division Chief Engineer, the estimate was 1,000 kilometers. But and that's a lot of found, suspected, whatever, and it's still an understanding that we still don't know.
Yeah. Which, sorry, I'm taking you back to Pierce Morgan, but it's like I'll even take it again. No, I'm just saying it's funny because how do I know that we don't know where all the tunnels are? Because no one in Hamas either knows where all the tunnels are. So a lot of times, like there's things that even your adversaries don't know the numbers, so you shouldn't be expected to know the numbers yourself. We just have to continue doing our best.
Don't give me that start.
Yeah,
I gave him a number. Then he asked how I got the number, and they said I didn't say a number. I said a number, and I told you how I got it. He didn't like it. So for the tunnels, it's 1,000 kilometers at this moment.
Yeah.
And actually, it's a really aside, but how did we know, what was the estimate of tunnels in Gaza before October 7th? It was 500 kilometers, and we got that from Hamas.
Yeah.
Because Hamas made public statements saying that. So it's like, really? That's the estimate? It isn't what you were tracking them, digging? No. It's around the ballpark, but they said that it was 500 kilometers.
Exactly. We're basing off of that. And by the way, that was Sinwar's brilliance. Is he understood our intelligence better than us, and he turned it as the game against us because he knew already. He was like, okay, they're listening. I mean, the worst thing that could happen to you is if your enemy assumes that you're actually listening to him. Then you're really in trouble. So, but yeah. So, anyways, that was so. Right now we're at 1,000.
Yep.
There's a big question. Also, a lot of what we defined as there's a big discussion going on in Israel today. Even what we defined as destroyed, is it really destroyed? Most of what was being used is liquid explosives to blow up the tunnels.
Yeah, let's go through them. I wrote an article. There's a list of them. And I'm really excited about what you created. There's 1, 2, 3, like four methodologies, and I always get the one. So we'll start with that one.
Yeah.
I always get why can't you just flood them?
Yeah.
Which is Project Atlantis, but can you flood to destroy a tunnel?
So you could try, but the problem here is, first of all, especially in Gaza, you're in sand, so it's going to start seeping into the ground. So you have to pump it at a pace where it's filling up the tunnel at a higher pace than it's seeping in the ground. And then there's at the end of the day, Gaza is not just flat; it's actually pretty hilly when you look at it, so if you're not doing it at the right location, it's just going to all start flowing down, into it rather than filling up from the top. So that was another challenge. But basically I won't get too much in trouble here, but basically it was pretty, I wasn't very surprised when it didn't work. I'll say it that way. And you just have to get to certain pressures that we knew that we didn't get to. And there was an excitement about it and a very hard push, but it wasn't done. I think also the engineers that were running it kind of knew, but they were being pushed so much to a limit that they just did it. But we could have known better doing it, but that was the challenge there. So that's the water. But basically, what it is it's not like a tunnel isn't just a confined space. Like you're streaming water, it's seeping into the ground. It's going.
It's also not a full tube like that you would need underwater. So it has cracks
and there's openings.
There's openings. There's actually drainage in some of them.
Yeah.
This is the whole, what I usually tell people, like, one, people still think, why don't you just flood it? Like that you guys didn't think of that. You absolutely thought about early, like December of 2023,
Yeah.
and found 5 industrial level pumps that could fill an Olympic swimming pool in 7 minutes, and tried to pump these tunnels, full of tunnels. And I talked to one brigade commander who was in Bat Sheva, I think, and he said that it took 2 weeks to get the water to come to the surface at a company level tunnel to get the fighters to come out. But it worked very tactically at that one spot. But in most places, like, it just kept pumping and pumping, and it didn't fill the tunnels,
Yeah.
and they're not connected. So of these 1,000 kilometers, there's, as you know, maybe the listeners don't know, sometimes you could find an engineer, although Muhammad was supposedly in charge of the engineering cores, but each area had their own engineer digging their own system. You had brigade tunnels, battalion tunnels, company tunnels, and then you had random tunnels. It isn't one integrated. It's actually in layers. It's Swiss cheese. It's old, new.
Yeah, you had World War methodologies of quickly digging a tunnel
That's
to where
right.
you want to get to.
You're not going to find a tunnel, start pumping water into it, and fill the whole system. And it's not going to collapse on itself, which is what, so they always say Egypt, right? So when Egypt did this in 2017, they pumped sewage into the tunnels, because they weren't braced. So it actually did sandy collapse tunnels, and then it did fill, and you could just see pools of sewage that they did. But if it's a really concrete formed thing, it isn't that it ain't going to collapse. So what was your point, to fill it and keep it filled?
Yeah. Yeah, it's not going to be tunnel destruction at that point. It's, it might serve a purpose, but then the tunnel is going to be reusable again after that or something.
Yeah,
So
but that's a big question.
Or to flush out, right? There's one video, which is a cool video, where the Hamas guy is there and it's flooding into him. Like, okay,
Yeah.
that's a really tactical move. So flooding didn't work. That's one of the attempted ways.
Yeah. Then, a lot of times people ask about the aerial bombing. So aerial bombing doesn't destroy a tunnel. What it does is it creates a certain collapsation inside and sends a shockwave within that kills people inside the tunnel, but it's not destroying a tunnel. Like, unless you dropped one of these bombs every 20 feet again and again and again, which we could calculate. The U.S. doesn't have enough bombs to do even 10% of that. So it's that isn't relevant. Then we have liquid explosives. That's what was mostly being used. The big problem with liquid explosives is basically, if you go to the mining world and you ask someone, okay, how do you create collapsation within rock or ground or anything?
Dynamite, right?
Yeah, well, it's not that. Is you want the explosion not to happen within the airspace. You want it to happen actually in the ground. That's what will cause the collapsation. But if you're making the explosion happen within the airspace, the pressure will just go, like I said, in a bomb. It will just flow through. So, we were pouring huge amounts of explosives. What we were slowly seeing is that actually just in the main area where we were pouring this explosive, that's where there was some sort of collapsation because there was so much. But the areas where we thought it would go, it just kind of like caused a little bit of collapsation or something like that, but it didn't really do the effect that we wanted, and they were very quickly able to go and rehabilitate it. So it depends on geology. It's still being researched, but
what I was told is you basically drill a hole every 50 feet and you pump down into it.
Exactly. And still we saw that not for sure that worked. And it's at a huge risk to troops. We had a horrible accident where many soldiers were killed because it blew up, below them. I lost a very good friend there. Like it's also, at a huge risk here. And by the way, we're seeing this in Lebanon now, which is crazy, but we're pouring huge amount. We're just piling the tunnels up with explosives.
I saw one like literally a couple hours ago.
God forbid, like that's a truck driving into Lebanon where we know what's happening with the drones. If God forbid a drone hit that truck beforehand,
it's dual compound, right? The mixture, the liquid mixture. So it's not.
Yeah, in Gaza, it's a truck that you have to mix it for it to be. It's a bit problem. Anyways, there's a lot of trouble there that we're doing. So.
Absolutely, like a flamethrower. You're a target.
Exactly. So right now, the method that's being used is cement. Now, the big challenge with cement is, on one hand, you want the cement to be very hard for it to be very difficult to dig through the tunnel. But the harder it is, the less it could go. So here, there's been a lot of expertise and engineering on how do you create the right
That's right. Yeah,
mixture that on one hand could go very, very far, and the other hand fill up the tunnel. And this is what the IDF now, like if you speak now to engineers in the IDF, they'll say we've transitioned. We're no longer collapsing or destroying tunnels. We are filling up tunnels. That's
I thought there was a cost. I thought that when I talked to the Gaza division engineer, it was like $1 million a kilometer or something like that.
so. I mean, it's getting cheaper thanks to capitalism because they put in a competition, but still, it's very, very, very expensive.
Yeah.
Still, basically, any area, any like major tunnel you want to destroy, you're building almost like a cement factory.
Yeah.
Above it. Again, I'll be careful with what I say here, but I'm also worried about this to a certain extent because what we have to understand with Hamas is that their biggest advantage is time and that they're an army of ants, meaning so we're like in many ways we're leaving the tunnel almost stronger than what it is. And I don't know, but if the composure isn't hard enough, it's not that hard to dig through it. And then we even gave them a stronger segment at the end. So, but right now that's the method that's being used, and I think it's I don't know, but I think it's working.
Another option on the explosive is to string explosives through it, right? So
well, that's the one that I'm most excited about, and I think we as a company are going to focus on is how do you actually not do the explosive inside the tunnel, but you do it from above the tunnel.
But that was a lot of what's happening in Gaza, right? You would take like landmines and just string them.
But I mean,
daisy chain them all.
But that's like a perfect example where why wasn't there someone from the mine? Like I'm going to say this a little bit as a critique. Again, I'm probably going to get in trouble in this podcast. So I hope Israelis aren't listening to it. But like,
oh, they will. Trust me.
Yeah, they will. No, I'm
in
trouble. I'm in trouble. But if we listened more to people in the mining world, there was even very small things that we could have done that would have made the effect way better. Just for example, when we were laying out, I can show you a picture of me standing above one of these wines. We were putting them on the floor.
Yep.
If we just had a doctrine that said, let's hang them on the roof of the tunnel, it would, or even every area we do it, let's take off that circular segment.
And
let's put it on the roof of the tunnel above. The effect would be exponentially way better than laying it on the floor of the tunnel. So these are things that I think and I think, a lot of times the critique we get as a company, because, in Israel, like a lot of people have been dealing with this for so much time. They're like, who are you and what is this company? A lot of times I say our mission is not, we're not only inventing the technology, we're bridging the technology. There's so much knowledge out there that we just have to think about how, and this is what I did in detection. Me and my unit is we saw what's out there and we implemented it for military use case. I think that's what we needed there. So if you would go to any mining expert and you would say, I could put a landmine or a tank mine on the floor, I could put it on the roof of the tunnel. Of course, you put it on the roof of the tunnel. That would, would cause a much larger. So these are things that like a lot of times we have to work on, and slowly Israel's learning the expertise to do it.
But talk to me, there's one other way to destroy a tunnel, if I'm correct, with a mining robot that goes advanced and starts collapsing it from the inside.
Yeah, so that's what we're working on. Our challenge has been a lot of times that still it depends. Like the way Hamas dug their tunnels is that it's actually very interesting. They dig into like it's sand, and when they get to the harder clay, that's where they want to dig their tunnel because it's more stable.
Yep.
So at the start, we were sure we would just send in our robotic excavator and we would just, collapse the tunnel from within. What we saw is that a lot of times we're still we're able to collapse the tunnel, but we want to create, we're challenging ourselves. We want to create full demolition. We want to completely destroy the tunnel. And now I think what we're examining is different methodologies and I won't go too much into detail, but combination of explosive and drilling within this machine and giving the machine the ability to do it that could create that sort of demolition.
Because from my understanding is that even the ones you have collapsed, and I actually got this, and I was with the unit in Gaza City not too long ago, is that finding the collapsed ones, if it's just a segment, they just dig a new tunnel that goes around it, an elbow, or digs out the one you collapse.
Yeah, there's a great definition, I think, for a destroyed tunnel is that they prefer dig a new one than go back to the old one.
Yeah, that's what you want. That's the goal, right?
Yeah, that's what we want. So we have to make it we have to make them prefer dig a new one than have to go where we go. So I think that's why we've been tough on ourselves is, yes, you could collapse the tunnel, you could make some dirt fall, but you want to make it so hard that they won't even want to go back to what you destroyed. They're just going to start from the get-go, and then it'll be easier for you to detect and find them.
Yeah. Greg, is there anything in the physics or civilian world we talked about earlier about the burden and spoil? That's all getting about it out. Is there any civilian challenges that are also about filling voids?
About filling voids. Yeah, I mean, you kind of covered the concrete, and there's the flowable fill level where you kind of use a lower psi, more viscous um, concrete. But yeah, I don't know.
Because what I always got told, and I got you, I think it might have been you that told me about, doesn't that make the surface unstable for building something on top of it? The fact that you've created, there's a void and you've collapsed it, doesn't that make it hard now to build on the surface?
Yeah, definitely could. And, if that's a constraint, yeah, definitely. And so that's in the construction tunnel world, even the overcut of the machine, right? There's a void outside of your liner that you have to fill with grout. If you don't fill that void, you're going to cause collapse on the surface, right? And that might just be a few inches outside of your
It's not
tunnel
like kitchen
liner.
grout, right?
No, it's probably, yeah, it's probably more like a concrete, right? But yeah, so because your tool is cutting at a certain diameter, but your liner
That's right.
is less, right? So there's this void of earth around it, right? And if you don't fill that, then you're gonna have problems, especially if you're trying to do an infrastructure thing like boring is or whatever, right? So you have to go and fill that void. Unless you're in rock, if you're in rock and it's competent, then you may not have to deal with that. But in soft ground, yeah, you definitely have to worry about filling that. And that kind of like circle back. That's one of the bigger constraints on speed is not to catch up to the snail is not necessarily just being able to mine faster. It's all the things you have to do in between, right?
Yeah.
So whether that's removing the spoils or building your liner or extending your utilities or all of those things are what makes going fast hard. Not necessarily just more RPMs or more thrust or whatever, right? So it's all these other problems that you've got to solve in between. So
It makes me think of, again, my challenge. And you can go on YouTube and there's like a mountain guy that will teach you how to dig tunnels. And he teaches you bracing, like the old mining way of using wood braces. If we were to flip to, okay, how do we create a survivable underground space? I know there's a lot of science to that about the amount of burden you want on top of you to protect you from certain types of munitions. But then there's, of course, depending on the geology, the risk of collapsation if it's not braced correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, like, a circle is one of the strongest things you can kind of, surround yourself by, and that's why the traditional tunnels are, they're made out of segments, so it's a super strong design that can, support sky rises above it, and whatnot. So, yeah, that's definitely a big thing to consider if you're going to build underground fortresses. But obviously, concrete and steel will likely be involved unless you're in rock already, and that can kind of support itself. But even then, you're probably still going to want to reinforce that with something. But
Yeah, and I think that's also like we talked about the challenges specifically in military use case of logistical footprint above ground and speed.
Yep.
But I think there's also certain elements that we don't have to be as concerned about that give us an advantage that could contribute to speed. For example, structural integrity. We're not building tunnels that are going to serve cities, for 100 years. Sometimes we're doing something that, in 1 week we're going to just maneuver through. And then, there's different compromises that you could do, of course, without risking troops, but that contribute to moving faster and doing certain processes faster. As you said, even this idea of like moving and just even throwing the dirt behind you, this is exactly the approach. Is sometimes you just want to maneuver in the crust of the earth. You don't even want to create a structure. So a lot of times when we talk to tunneling experts, they're like, they have certain requirements that you go, wait, this. We're not talking about, a tunnel that's going to be a highway. We're talking about a tunnel where we're going to have robots pushing, certain things through quickly, and that's it. So that's also where there's different requirements for different things, and the military requirements shift a little bit, the technology.
Because I know that this is a part of the conversation. We are now starting to get familiar with, of course, Shahed, cheap autonomous drones that can flood the air. We're now seeing it on the surface of the ocean. Ukraine's had a bunch of success with like explosive canoes, robotic canoes, and now underwater. So when are we going to see the crust of the earth uh, autonomous explosives?
So I mean, we're on a mission in Traysar. I
Can we call it like the Kung Fu Gopher or something like that?
we spoke about the names that we can't get in trouble with copyrights, but
That's right.
who would imagine that would be what limited us at the
Yeah.
end? But me and Greg were speaking about this with the team, but we're on like this we're not some theoretical science company. Like we're on a mission that the next time that the U.S. has to deal with Iran, and unfortunately there's a high likability that it happens. By the time that happens, the U.S. has a new set of capabilities to destroy these underground structures, which will change the geopolitical situation in the world. And we're going to move as fast as possible and as quick as possible. And I'm hoping, in less than a year that we already have, basic prototyping abilities that are implemented in the field that give you that thing. And we're on a mission. Like this is like we see the importance of this, we see how crucial it is, and we're going to move as fast as possible to make it happen.
If you could break the mold or break the cognitive mold, then you start to, of course, you have the big goal, futuristic, like delivering special troops underground. But if you just take what exists now for the surface, like they have in Ukraine, actually, even at the National Training Center, they deploy mines through the drones. So where they'll have a minefield, which is very common. You lay it on the surface. Sometimes they don't even cover them. Somebody will come by with a mine clear, like the engineer will mine clear, and then the drone will just come back and put the mines back behind the people that drove through there. So if you could do that under the surface of the earth, is to put out minefields. Or as an urban warfare guy, one of the biggest challenges is a strong point. So I'm sure in Gaza, it's just a building that's really built really strongly, and you can bomb it. Everything from Pablo's house in Stalingrad. I mean, I can teach people to find a really strong building and hold that building if it has. But what if something could come underneath it? You think of the movie The Rock or something. If I can come underneath you, it's as much as coming under your city. If I can come under the building, Greg, big, I know why question. We talked a lot about it, but where do you see Subterra technologies in 10 years?
I think a long way from where they are now, and that's an exciting thing to think about, and your mind can kind of run wild with it a little bit. But I think as Asher said, just bridging some of the things that exist now to maybe the military realm, I think is gonna if you took all the things that exist now and implemented them in a different way, I think you'd already think it was futuristic. But I think we're gonna push the limits on a lot of these things that exist already, and I think in 10 years. As Palmer has kind of pushed on as well, like I think you're going to see a completely different domain in the Subterra and how battles are fought.
I think you got to do storytelling too. We did that a little bit with urban warfare. And the technology is needed. We wrote science fiction of what could be.
Yep.
Not even that far off. And that's where a lot of developments from the airplane to the tank. I mean, some of them start in sci-fi. So you could write a Subterra story. Imagine. And there are some, which is really, for me, the more important question. Like I've done enough with like research labs and things like that. I know like a few of the physics problems, like cell phone towers, because at the time, the Earth is curved. So you need cell phone towers. Now you have lower, but satellites. Is there a physics challenge in the Subterra that hasn't been solved yet that needs to be solved?
I think speed is probably still the biggest one, right? Because I think being able to move quickly is something that is probably one of the biggest reasons why this hasn't taken as much traction as we're pushing for it, and we think that it deserves. Is that it's considered too slow to be the right thing, but obviously like that has to be solved. So I think that's the biggest physics problem is solving the speed issue, and because obviously, digging a long tunnel sometimes takes, a very long time, and that maybe, you don't have that essence of time in certain battle situations. So I think that that's still the biggest physics issue to solve is speed.
All right.
I think we also spoke about this, but I'm super hyped by the whole small nuclear reactors that the Department of Energy has
Yeah.
been. We're coming close to 4th of July, and they Department of Energy defined that as like a goal that they want a few companies that were chosen to become critical by that time, and I think that the more we see these small nuclear reactors for data centers, we're going to start seeing it for many other use cases all over.
Your analogy is that there are submarine, nuclear-powered submarines. So you would want a nuclear-powered Subterra machine.
Yeah. So, like, just to give a small example, there is this idea of thermal boring.
What is that? I don't know what that
It's
is.
basically you're melting the rock,
Ah.
so you don't have to deal with earth removal.
What's melting it?
So it's you're getting
Lasers?
to it's like this thermal. It's like a very firm. It could be gas. That's what we think the Russians were
This
using.
is Weird Science, right?
Yeah, this is a
What's
science
the
thing.
movie where they developed like the laser that punches through like the whole campus?
Oh, you're the movie expert.
Yeah, I don't know.
They,
don't
they're,
know.
they're developing a laser and they get it right and it shoots a laser like through like statues and through all the campus buildings.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Then there's also I thought of the Jack Black movie Envy, where they have the laser that makes the poop disappear, the vaporizer.
There's one where they're developing a laser.
Oh yeah,
can
that could
cut,
just go through.
and they get it right and it blows like through everything.
So this technology exists. There was a company called Petra that based in California that they were doing that, and they shut down. And I think the reason they shut down was just the energy costs that it was costing, like to do even a small like little section.
So it's like the directed energy challenge of the source, the energy source.
So this is like a concept that exists and there's now another startup company that I think they bought Petra's machinery and they're trying to do the same thing. So, and I think that if you take these technologies and you combine it with endless energy, you could start getting to very interesting, like you told me I have to do some storytelling and things like that. So the moment you're melting the rock, you don't have to remove earth. And here we're starting to get to some interesting.
Right, because I've heard people fascinated about that in breaching, as the Israelis basically patented the moving through the walls, infestation, but they're usually using manpower or explosives. But what if you could just melt that concrete? But then you have the chemical aspect of it, the danger to the human that's doing it.
Yeah, that's a big part of
Okay,
it.
on this one of the lists. So actually, you and I talked about this having a wish list. If you know my writings, I actually have a Subterranean wish list. I have every year, me and my two urban warfare experts do a Christmas list. A lot of times this stuff just never gets off. We still wish for it, like a school for urban warfare, or a center of excellence to maintain the expertise. So I'd love to go around the round table. I'm sure we're all going to think of different things. We've probably talked about a lot of them about your Subterra wish list. So my number one thing.
I'm writing this.
Actually, having done this, so maybe it's when I come out to watch you, and you said you had this book of 40. Sometimes you just need a whiteboard. And there's actually, when I was working for that 4-star, we went to a bunch of like MIT and places that have places called IDEO and things like that help you through this design aspect of just creating wild things, but unleashing yourself in the way it's done today. I'm sure we could have a lot of fun. Again, if you have operators, scientists, people that have been, even science fiction people. I have a good friend, Max Brooks, that wrote the World War Z. And it's fascinating that it's actually history just rewritten. So everything that's happened in World War Z actually happened. So the number one thing, because I am also a big guy that we have forgotten what it will take us years to remember. So, and I'm also a big guy who says everything in warfare today is a combination of the new and the old, because there's a lot of people from literally people in ancient Jerusalem that faced Subterra challenges and found solutions in different ways. And my number one thing would be a field expedient handbook. So we're talking about technologies that we need, but actually, I'm sure if we we went out and went to all the coal miners and the diggers and all this stuff, from the canary in the cage to the FDNY, who they literally have a rope that's how they keep track of each other, and if they pull on the rope, it's a message. Like there isn't one. I can tell you that doesn't exist. So the number one thing on my wish list, this is the way we usually do it on my podcast, is that we all go around and take turns, is a Subterra domain field expedient, meaning take what you have, use it differently, because maybe you're deployed and you don't have that. And this is one of the episodes I had was a Sergeant First Class that in Afghanistan, there are a lot of water crevasses. So it's like these tunnels underneath everything. And he entered one. And we also forgot that night vision. So the ability to see underground, there is no ambient light. So you have to have, there's some advancements in IR and things like that emanating a source, but there is no ambient light. So your normal MVG that relies only ain't going to work. So he actually talked about trying to get from one shaft in a covert to another, and he used 550 cord, which is great. So I would want that field expedient tactics guide. And it's not sexy, but I'm telling you, it's needed. Go ahead, Asher.
Ooh.
You only get one to start off with.
I only get one.
You said you got 40. You already got a head start. You've been thinking about this stuff.
I mean, am I allowed to say it's like something I want, but I'm also working on having? Or?
Sure,
okay.
Of course.
So I mean, this also, I mean, it actually connects to yours. Is one of the things we really want to make happen soon is we actually decide to broaden a little bit the vision on this, but a think tank that's more field deployed think tank of survivability, because what we feel is that there's amazing work done in the defense field but it's very focused on lethality, and people have to start really understanding the importance of survivability. But I imagine this think tank being very original and different is it's a forward deployed, just like Palantir have forward deployed engineers, we have forward deployed researchers where we're going all over the world. We're literally studying, Ukrainian usage of Subterra, of netting, of so many small low-tech things that have incredible significance. And then we have another team that are actually going back to U.S. soldiers and our allies and training them these methodologies so that in the next battle, every U.S. soldier, for free, like this is part of the work, how to do netting. Like there's a whole world of netting, So I know I'm not talking about Subterra, but how to dig a ditch and how to do all these different things. So to build this basis, and there's so many allies. Like I think companies like Firestorm Labs or Armada, they are doing forward deployed manufacturing and forward deployed data centers. These are all around the survivability world, and we have to build this. My dream is like we build this coalition where the average American isn't just excited by the lethality of our weapons, but the ability to understand the importance of the survivability of from first waves of attack and continuing to fight. So that as Western civilization, that we do value life at a very high element, we could continue doing what we're doing. So that's kind of my wish. And then we'll also do your field expedient.
Yeah, because the think tank would produce those. So
together.
We have to take a moment of silence, if you don't know about it, for the U.S. Army's Asymmetric Warfare Group, which was an organization that basically did that, but actually didn't, because if you do everything, you're doing nothing. You can do everything, but you do nothing well. So they had the Asymmetric Warfare Group is a group that the U.S. Army created after a couple of years in Iraq, basically in Iraq because of the ID threat, and created these really experienced non-commissioned officers, brought them together and deployed them around the world to gather lessons and then be operational advisors. And they had one of the only Subterra experts that the Army had, who then became their guy, and when they needed them. So it was this think tank repository that did produce handbooks and things like that. But then it started to get misused, though, to be almost like problem solvers for commanders in special areas, rather than let it be what a true think tank is, which is advancing bodies of knowledge, which I built, helped co-found the Modern War Institute, which was about that. So you got me, but I will have to mention, because it's about survivability, which I agree. If you narrow a domain that isn't being, so what I say about the Subterra domain, and I think you saw me post this on X, it is the most under-researched and under-resourced domain on the earth. If you just think about it, if you think space, air, it is the most under-researched and under-resourced. You want to build a resource, which I usually say is you got me, is the biggest global challenge for urban warfare and subset, although it shouldn't be a subset, is expertise. It isn't capabilities. The gap is expertise. So the fact that you would build that is you got me on that one. And I will say, because I used to say with survivability, one of the greatest innovations, there's actually a few of them, these soldier bottom-up innovations of the last 30 years was a wire basket that you filled with dirt for fortification on the move. So that the HESCO barrier, genius. And once you tell people about it, you didn't have that? No, they didn't have it. You would fill sandbags. And if there's no dirt to fill a sandbag, you got nothing. So this basket was as much as a net. Just what's the counter to a fiber optic drone right now? You put up a net and it runs into the net. It isn't the greatest solution, but you're right. A think tank is more than needed. The expertise is the gap. There are physics gaps that need to be solved, and you have to bring together the expertise, and this is why it's under-resourced, because you have to believe in it. Greg, your turn.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I guess, making it broad, I guess I just want, I want to be where the Subterra domain is accepted as what it is and, what we're talking about and what we're pushing for. And then, I think we're going to push hard for that, and we're going to get more engineers wanting to be involved, and we're going to get more people on board pushing for this and getting it to where we know it needs to be. So, yeah.
Okay. I want John Wick's engineer. I want somebody who can rapidly, time being a constraint, go to Indy City and give me the maps of everything. And if you think about it, it is a lot of archival work. And this has happened. I mean, we found Clara Barton's apartment not too long ago in Washington, D.C. So it had been sealed inside of a building for like 100 years.
That's crazy.
And they were doing some construction, and they found it. If you had a AI that was
the
able,
company doing that actually, 4M.
yeah,
They're taking all archives and they're trying to
Yep.
build off.
But then you would have to add it to, because like in Kyiv, it's an ancient city. So there's nobody with, some of it was built in ancient times. As you said, you found all these caves and everything. So I want basically an AI John Wick engineer that has the ability to take all the archival information, take all the, if there's a sensor you can put into it, take what we know today and build almost like what I've now seen of the Gaza Hamas network, build that network for me. And then that way, when I look at a enemy environment, I can find ways to use that subterranean environment or Subterra environment differently. So I want John Wick's engineer.
Building the playbook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because then I could break people if I can give them stories about from ancient warfare to here of most people. Again, it's a cognitive bias, and I get it all the time with urban warfare that most people think the way you take a city is surround it and start clearing building to building. Like that's not what's happened in history. You can infiltrate, you can penetrate, you can aerial envelopment, things like that. If we truly had experts in the Subterra, they would be able to say like, why are you looking at that space? What do we know about it? And I'm going to people who live in these environments their entire lives, and they don't know what's underneath their feet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, by the way, I'll just point out something very interesting is we're starting to find a lot of tunnels being dug in East Jerusalem. And the way they're being dug is they're going into ancient burial graves. And then because, the way they were dug is whole families were buried in one cave. So it's a little bit of a larger structure.
Yeah.
So they're going into these ancient caves, which we know these caves exist, but then they go in and they continue digging through the burial site to cross the border. So exactly what you said. We're literally in East Jerusalem now. There's ancient Second Temple burial graves that are turning into smuggling and will end up being terror tunnels.
You think about it, if you had awareness of it, and then you could have your robotic digger map a route where they don't have to, they connect things for you
Yeah.
and create you a route.
Which, by the way, that's, one of the, again, we're building vehicles for the underground. So as I said, the big innovation of the borehole that we did in Gaza was that suddenly you're looking for something that's, 5 feet next to you rather than 80 feet below you. A lot of what we want to do also with a lot of our machinery is to just have it run along lines, along borders, along lines, and be so close to the target of what it's looking for that it will actually detect at a much, much better rate, but to do it, if we could, Greg is always talking about speed. If we could, do a mile a day, we have 20 of these and we could start going across the whole US border, we could find it a much better way, tunnels there. So that's one of our visions is exactly what you said, is these machineries carrying sensors and slowly mapping out, and doing it again and again and again because they know how to do it, as a patrol. As I imagine there's a above ground patrol and there's a below ground patrol, and we're doing that. So that
Your turn.
my turn. Oof. I want like one of these like nuclear startups to lend me one of their nuclear reactors. That's not that big. It's close. By the way, Valor Atomics, the U.S. just did a training where they flew one of their small nuclear reactors from point A to point B, which is super cool. So definitely, I want as soon as possible. It's actually cool where we're doing our testing now. We're next to one of these companies, so I'm sure they'll lend it to us for a day or two. But to see the potential of, I think I'll say this to all like defense startups, is I think we're going to be, and especially in the world of Elon, and we're talking a lot about this, scale of energy that we're entering in the universe. I think we're going to be entering in the defense world a possibility of a world of endless energy. That we have to start thinking about our technologies in those ways because it unlocks a huge amount of opportunity. So yeah, so I'm just asking to borrow for a week. Start from there.
We're back to you, Greg.
Well, I'm sorry. Back to me on
The wish list.
The wish list.
we're still going on the wish
We're
list.
still going, yeah.
Yeah.
We go till we're exhausted. All
Oh,
that.
okay. Yeah, I mean, I think I was gonna go nuclear as well because I mean, it's like
Nice.
that seems pretty good. But beyond that, yeah, I don't know. You don't want to think in the terms of the lethality because it's like it's not where you want to be. But obviously, like having the tech for that is exciting. I think the survivability is like it's important. Both are good, but like I want to see that arsenal unveiled of this, these underground torpedoes, right, that are just being launched, and like you're in this futuristic Dune world of, the crust of the earth not being a limitation anymore. So I don't know, that's kind of broad strokes there, but obviously all of the drones and aerial things that are being unleashed, I think it's going to be exciting to see this new arsenal of, underground, weaponry in the field of play.
All right. So I have one that is actually going to take me back, and you'll appreciate this. I was doing an interview at the beginning of Gaza, and I mentioned, because I had seen it in Israel years ago, and they had called it, somebody, probably I was walking around, the SpongeBob bomb, which was a dual compound bag, and you pull the metal strip, you mix the bag, you throw it down an opening, and it seals with foam the opening of like a sewer tunnel. The news took my reporting of that and turned it into this. I call it like the SpongeBob foam or something. They took it and they didn't use AI, but they used graphic representation of a sponge bomb that you stick under the ground. It went viral, like Israel's deploying sponge bomb in Gaza, right? But it's if you go back to my old writings at Modern War Institute, one of the things I want is a hand grenade sponge bomb, so that if there's a opening that I want to move past quickly, to be able to throw a grenade, which gets you into the engineering of whatever you call it, but how they lift houses and all that stuff with sponge sprayers and all that stuff. But I want a grenade size that you throw it down an opening, it seals the opening to something enough that I can have confidence to move forward.
I will do that. No problem. Yeah, no, I mean, I'll just say I want another 20 engineers like Greg. Like, I think, we're now hiring, and we want like we were lucky with Greg, but I think we need engineers who are mission driven.
Yeah.
I think we offer a lot. Like, we offer a very important mission for America and Western democracy, and giving back the West its deterrence. Um, and But on the other hand, we're offering some really interesting science to do and some really hard challenges that we have to overcome. And I think to be able to bring together a culture of engineers that are both mission driven, patriotic, that's very much the culture that we want to establish in the company, but together with super passionate and curious about solving problems, I think, we really will get there. And, with these, like, many times I feel like my mission as a non-engineer in my core is to just give the engineers enough specs, because I know that whatever, like, I look at my team today and I say, whatever we give them, they're going to solve. Like, that's not going to be the issue. So, in many ways, I envision this company becoming a company that both, we're envisioning for ourselves the limits of, of science fiction of what we could accomplish, but also that, slowly as the Army is realizing that this is a domain of warfare and we're helping them realize, feels very comfortable to come to us, just like they'll go to a Lockheed or a Boeing and today Anduril and say, well, this is what we need, and say, this is what we need, and we'll have the people that we trust that will do it and be passionate about doing it.
As much as Palmer has like a group of engineers that he takes on with him on projects, I think you need that absolutely to solve a problem with a certain amount of. I agree with you, and I would hope that this isn't mine. This is yours. I have other ones. That what I would want, and if you become it, is the one-stop shop for the Subterra domain, as in people believe both to work for the organization, but also investors believe that it doesn't exist and that it is the thing that people need that they're not asking for, is the expertise and to own the space as much as the early people did in the sea and things like that, to start getting a grasp of understanding what's in the box before you even. I love to talk about the sci-fi, and if we understand the box more and get our grasp around and own it, then we'll know what needs to be or what's out there that can be dual use and transferred and everything. So I hope that you become the one-stop shop for the Subterra. So when they call, because even in Israel, it isn't, and this is why I try to explain to people, because they're focused on, as they should be, what are their challenges, and they're not an expeditionary military. I guess they didn't used to be.
Yeah.
Although ranging Yemen was a great feat. So I'll give you one more of mine, and again, we could probably sit on a whiteboard. Do you know what a black thorn is?
No.
So my first duty station was Panama, and I didn't know either, and I learned that most thorns, if they get into your body, they work their way out. A black thorn, which covers everything in Panama, work their way in. So I would want, and we kind of mentioned it, but I would just name it differently and also miniaturize it, a black thorn swarm. So basically hundreds of aerial delivered things that then work their way in to something with a small payload. As much as if you've ever watched this thing called Slaughterbots, I thought it was a good thing, but it was actually a professor in an academy warning people about the future of lethal drones. And this is like years ago. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I want that. I didn't understand that it was like a bad thing, what he was talking about, but they were dropping from like an AC-130, and it just dropped hundreds of these over the enemy territories. And then they sought out the bad guys because it could use AI. I'm like, how's that bad? It's distinguishing the enemy. It's doing all the things you'd want to end it quickly. So I would want these airdropped munitions that then start burying their way in. Not one, I know that the DARPA child, but they start burrowing their way in.
No, it's
a
also
swarm.
very important because in like the mining world, what you do is you time explosives. So when an explosive sets off and the wave is about to hit the other one, then it goes off it's exponential. So
that's the swarm aspect, right?
Yeah. So if you create a swarm like that, you could create with much less explosives. You could create a much if you know how to time it well. But yeah, I really like what I see 3 to 5 years from today is two things. I see or I'll say three things. Number one is I see our ability to penetrate and destroy any sort of underground structure by different machineries just digging through earth autonomously and setting off explosives. I see swarms of robotics if we need to extract something like uranium, where you don't just want to collapse the structure, you want to actually get to where you need to go. Robotic swarms that aren't just drone swarms, but a set of many different types of excavators with many different types of tool sets that are working together, removing earth, breaching. A lot of constraints are removed the moment it's all robotics communicating with each other, getting to where you need to get to, extracting what you need to extract and destroy. I think we're not far at all from that. If you look at companies today like Terra Firma and Bedrock, they're creating fleets of building and excavators above ground. I think we're going to get very close to that below ground. And number three is we're going to see in battlefields deployment of logistics, troops in the crust of the earth, and it's going to be a new way of maneuvering and preparation.
Like I said, it's in Russia right now. They've built underground drive-your tunnels as much as there are a couple ones in Haas. You can drive safely, and it's a line of communication that they've created underground near the front line because they were required to. I think one aspect we didn't talk about was also airfields because of how strategically important airfields are. And having studied the Battle of Kiev multiple times, most people know what happened at Hostomel. I was actually talking to somebody this weekend. Like I wrote the conclusive, like what happened with my research partner. It took 6 trips, but how important that one airfield was, and also grabbing it from the others. But then they actually called in airstrikes to rubble or to crater the airfield, and how important in war, especially joint forcible entry and things like that, the enemy's airfields are to them or to you is a whole area of just thinking. And how could the underground, the subterra of an airfield, which is on the surface very important, but it's resting actually on a thickness. Actually, I did this in Iraq where we had to go out and take samples of airfields because how it was constructed, not just the length of it, means what airplanes it can, as you were talking about the tanks. I had to take Air Force people that I don't like, just servicing out there to do core sampling of airfields to see if it could hold big aircraft or not. So I think there's a whole realm of thinking about if you could get to those and through the Subterra, what could you do to them or different things?
We're looking at two aspects. I mean, we're looking both at runway denial. Also, your ability, a lot of times to have things that could lay admin until you want to detonate them.
Yes, right.
It's a big thing. So that's number one. But number two is also, expeditionary airfields. How could you lay an airfield that as quick as possible, the gas tank, the gas lines, the utilities, the field itself, the way it's being laid. This is the whole methodology in the engineering core of laying these mats, for expeditionary airfields. This.
Well, they didn't have them in Syria.
Yeah.
Something happened. Or not Syria, Iran.
Yeah.
Iran, the whole aircraft got stuck.
So that's a whole other. I mean, it's funny you say, but it's something we're thinking about a lot.
The only thing it made me think of it was how they had so they couldn't hold the airfield, so they needed to crater it rapidly. And what they were trying to do to crater it with airstrikes and the very large artillery pieces, and having the Russians actually tried to fill that with concrete to try to replace it, but that's not the way it works. You can't, if you crater an airfield, you can't just patch it up.
Yeah, it takes a bit to cure.
Yeah. Well, guys, this has been go ahead.
Just a small note that was the fastest R&D the Israeli army ever did was in the 67 war with a runway denial bomb that they did in 12 hours. They thought of a certain way of it blowing up.
Wow.
That was an interesting one. But yeah.
Which is a whole science.
Yeah,
going back to I learned, when I was in Iraq, somebody blew a water pipe up in my area that was really important to the city. I didn't know. And this is where you're a soldier, you learn all kinds of stuff, and you have all these different scientists about how quickly, how fast cement has to dry. So if you're using it as a bracer, it doesn't magically dry itself. And there are and that I was brought quickening agents. So
Accelerators.
yeah, accelerators to make it dry quicker because this pipeline needed to have this concrete protector around it before I could leave it. So we had to sit there until it dried. And they brought this drying agent, which is the physics, which applies in a Subterra as much as when you want to build the bracing.
Something we're dealing with filling up tunnels.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
a big problem.
Yeah.
Is
Oh, that's
how
right.
long
How
it takes
fast
it to
it,
melt.
how-
To harden.
the cure, as they called it.
Yeah.
The cure. Well, guys, this has been a great conversation. I actually greatly appreciate the long form. And even though there are so many of these that we could have dug into deeper, I hope that, and I know that you guys will be working on that we stay connected, but I really appreciate long form podcasts so we can dig into them even more. And we could go into we could do the history, and there are a couple tunnel riots left over. I saw somebody post recently about the crudeness of the 1970s of what we were shoving soldiers down into the tunnels. I mean, they literally had a flashlight and a 9mm, and that's, if you really imagine today, again, all the stuff they have today doesn't work. I don't want to see American soldiers being put into a tunnel with a flashlight and a handgun if they get deployed into an environment that's the Subterra is pervasive, because it's going to be.
Yep.
But that video, I think, is so shocking.
So much.
That's what we had at the time, despite all the engineering and everything that we could.
And thank you, John, for being a voice of this, because I think when we started this, a lot of people said, well, these are a bunch of crazy guys, but I think you being a leader in this field and believing in it is really building the momentum for us to succeed. And I think above all, like for us as a company, like what will make me feel satisfied when we succeed, it's not a big raise or anything like that, is number one, when, people start talking about Subterra as a domain. So whether it's about us or not, that, the West wakes up to this importance. And number two is that the next time we go into a battle, the West has the abilities to do it. So that's our mission.
I will, and I know you've written some, so I recommend people go to your social media feed, because if you know the history of revolutionary technologies, there were people that were writing and speaking about it before it was accepted, to include like Omar Bradley going forward and seeing the tank in maneuvers after World War I and coming back and writing articles about them, which do have a significant effort. So I'd recommend to keep that up as well. As much as I've written about it, I'm a one-man kicking show and an ass-kicking contest, but it does have the ability to reach really important people. But I agree with you. That would be one measure of effectiveness. We have what we call measures of performance and measures of effectiveness, is if other senior leaders start talking about as a domain. Even though I've actually wasn't, when I was in the military, I hated when everybody called everything a domain.
Yeah.
But this one actually warrants being called a domain, especially when compared against, air, land, sea, space, and cyber.
I think it's going to be exciting to see competition start popping up, and that'll be the biggest compliment. So, we're not afraid of competition. It'll push
We'll help them at the
it'll
beginning.
push the bar. So, but I think that'll be the sign of this going where it needs to go. So,
Awesome.
but yeah,
so much,
thanks,
guys.
John. It's
Thank
been a
you.
pleasure.
Thank you
so much.